Hey, everybody. Welcome to Photos and Stories. All right, we got a really cool presentation today. I've got a whole bunch of people. If you've seen some of these other ones, we pretty much have done a single photographer. Today, I've got a whole bunch of photographers and another guest host, Stephanie Susan Jara. And we are going to talk about the new coffee table book, Capitol Theater, Volume 1, which just came out back in, where are we? In March. We were supposed to have a big book release party at the Capitol Theater at the Phil Lesh 80th birthday show. Phil was going to sign a bunch of books that we were going to kind of mysteriously sell to whoever happened to pull them out of a box and get a signed Phil book. And of course, that was all, those plans were turned upside down by Rona 20. COVID-19 has turned into Rona 20. So real quick, couple things. I'm going to do some quick business thank yous and whatnot, and we're gonna do things a little bit out of order. Normally, we would do a little bit more of a larger opening segment and then get to the photographers. But one of our special guest photographers, Danny Clinch, has some other plans, and he has to get off a little bit early. So we're going to get to Danny pretty quickly here. But first of all, I want to thank a bunch of Capitol Theater people because they helped make this book happen. Of course, there's Pete Shapiro, Bruce Wheeler, who's the GM, Tom Bailey, the previous GM, who we started this project with, Lita, who does all the merch. So if you order one of these books online, Lita will send it to you. Thank you, Lita. Steph, of course, Steph May, John Healy, Harrison, who's doing questions for us again today. So thanks to all the Cap Theater people, all the production people, Elliot, everybody down the line. You know, we love you all. Thank you so much. Let's see here. Couple other things. I just found this out. If you have Sirius XM, I'm going to be on Tales from the Golden Road today at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's a little bit earlier, an hour earlier. They're rerunning Tales from the Golden Road because they can't go into Sirius XM and do it. So I'm going to be talking about my Jerry Garcia book on Channel 23 later today. I want to talk about a couple of different things here. So saveourstages.com. Healy, go to that next photo. Many of you maybe saw this photo that I posted yesterday on Instagram and Facebook of this empty venue. It's got two patrons and Tim Bloom from the Mother Hips performing. 20, and it's very, very sad. This is the Great American Music Hall, and the Great American Music Hall is a small independent venue here in the United States. And there's many of these venues. And just to name a few in the Bay Area, of course, there's the Independent, the Warfield, Terrapin Crossroads, Sweetwater. Of course, there's the Troubadour in LA and the Mishawaka in Fort Collins and the Boulder and Fox Theaters in Boulder. And of course, the Brooklyn Bowls and the Cap. These are all independent music venues that are at risk of becoming extinct. Please go back to the slide with the websites. Go to saveourstages.com and send a letter to your congressperson, your senator, and let them know that our government needs to help this industry like they're helping the airline industry and many other Americans. The people who work at these venues and perform in these venues are part of the 40 million people that need help. There's a GoFundMe for the Capitol Theater staff that's up here on this slide. We have a photo contest today. While you're watching this, the capitoltheater.com/photo contest. You can learn about that and win a copy of our book. We have a few of these that we're going to give away today. And of course, you can buy the book on the Capitol Theater merch site, which is the-capitol-theater.myshopify, or just type in your browser Capitol Theater merch and it'll come up, or you can go to relix.com and go to their merch site as well. So buy merch from the venues, buy them from the bands, because that's how these people are making money these days. The Capitol Theater book, we started a while ago on this project. So Pete Shapiro and I have made 5 coffee table books together now. The first one was for Fare Thee Well, the Grateful Dead 50th anniversary shows. Pete came to me and said, let's make a book. And it was really a fabulous book. It's done very well received, because as we all know, Fare Thee Well was an incredible family reunion that Deadheads got to experience together, and we have this book. And then Pete loves tangible documentation of what he does with his businesses. The Cap, this is the flaming lips of the Cap. This is the back cover of it. of the book. So we've made 3 coffee table books about the Lock-In Festival every 2 years. We actually would have made another one after this year that was going to happen in June, which of course it's not. It may happen in October. We shall see. Our fingers are crossed, but you know, this Rona 20 thing is not very good. So anyway, so I just really quickly, before we get into Danny, so we can get him going here, is Portchester, right? So here's this shot that I took of the Happy Birthday Phil billboard in Portchester. Portchester and the Cap have really, really meshed incredibly well together. You know, I think people were skeptical, and when Steph gets in a little bit later and talks about the history of the Capitol Theater, I think we'll realize how important that theater is to the Portchester community and the Westchester community. And so we have this slide of this Happy Birthday Phil. You know, where else can you go where the fire department gives a musician like Phil Lesh an honorary fire hat and makes him an honorary member of the fire department? The mayor gives him the key to the city. Pete Shapiro comes out with these epic birthday cakes for artists like Phil Lesh and other artists. You know, Pete is conjuring up the spirit of Bill Graham and what Bill Graham started in terms of connecting with these artists and making them feel like home. And this is why people want to come back to the Cap. It's not just another nameless, faceless venue. And there are a lot of venues like that, a lot of them in the Bay Area that are run by old BGP people, Bill Graham Presents people, you know, have that vibe. But Pete has really taken it to heart. And I have to say that when you walk into the Cap, it's a special place. You know, pumpkins on stage for Halloween. I love this shot that Scott Harris took, one of our photographers here today, of the Further bus, the Ken Kesey Further bus in front of the Capitol. I believe there was a band cabinet playing on top of it. And then of course you get to the fans, right? You know, the fans make up such a huge part of this venue, and we all love to photograph fans dancing in these lobbies and raging. This guy in midair, these 3 people with their fists up. That's a My Morning Jacket show last summer. And you know, beautiful hippie chicks and guys raging. And there's just so many incredible photos. I love this shot across the front at a Phil show also, where just you see the smiles on these people's faces and the bliss. You know, Cap regulars, and you know, so many incredible people in the audience in that moment, in their church, in their temple. Here's a great shot that I love of this woman, my friend Christine, with her hands up in the air. You know, it just really shows how people are connecting to the music in this venue. And you know, these photos really, really show that vibe. And this shot of the projections on the wall, a unique thing to the Capitol Theater, where there's these, you know, 3D projectors and they're mapping on the ceilings and the walls. And it makes for a really dynamic visual experience, whether it's a psychedelic hippie jam band or not. There's always stuff going on these walls. Backstage, Bruce Wheeler and Tom Bailey, the GMs, have these guest books, these big giant white guest books. And we photographed a bunch of these pages and put them in the book. And here you can see Phil and Friends signed this in 2013. And I mean, here, April 12th, 2013, great to play the Capitol Theater. Thanks everybody, John Prine. That means so much to us now that we've lost John Prine, you know, one of the great, most legendary singer-songwriters in our country. And, you know, here's J-Rad with Marco and Tom and Scott and Dave. And, you know, here's another one, the Capitol Theater, a great place to be. Alan Toussaint, you know, I mean, another legendary artist who's gone. Buddy Guy's band, Warren Haynes, who's family to all of us at the Cap. The Marcus King Band. I love this one from Gene Ween. Hi, Peter. I haven't had a cigarette in 10 days, so go fuck yourself, you motherfucking fuck. I mean, like, look at the love that these artists give to the Capitol Theater, right? And of course, Pigeons Playing Ping Pong, inviting the flock in. So, normally I would go to Stephanie Susanjara at this point, but I'm going to introduce her after we do Danny. So Danny, here we are with our first shot of yours, which is My Morning Jacket. And it's a live shot. It's taken up in the balcony. And then if we flip through a couple more of these photos real quick, you can see there's a bunch of backstage stuff, right? You got Jim James, and here's Carl and Patrick in the dressing room. And you know, a lot of fans have never been in the dressing room. I know you can't tell, but the wallpaper back there are all these guitar picks. This is this beautiful custom wallpaper that Pete Shapiro had made for the theater and the backstage dressing rooms. And there's these incredible guitar picks with photos. It's very cool. But Patrick playing drums. Danny, tell me a little bit about when you're going to shoot a band like MMJ, which you have such a deep, strong relationship with, how you approach something like this, because you may be working for the band at that show, but a lot of times these are just your friends and your family, and you're there just kind of hanging out with not necessarily any agenda, except for to sort of document pop culture history. And this happens to be at the Cap. You're not considered one of the Cap photographers, neither am I, but you're family to all of us, and you're one of us, and welcome anytime. So what's your approach like with an MMJ on something like this?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Good to see all the photographers in here. Thanks for pulling this together, Jay.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think that's the case in this particular situation. I think they were playing, and I just was invited, and I wanted to come out. I wasn't really on assignment, but as we all know, we'd go out and do this for free anyway, and we do. And it's just for me, I do think that a lot of bands, they appreciate being documented, and you become friends with them and you spend time with them, and they realize, like, who do they want to have hanging out with them in the backstage, who they're going to let back there that's not going to get in the way, and it's going to, photograph and document what they're doing a set list, preparing to go onto the stage. And I'm just there looking for great moments. A lot of times, sometimes I'm participating if I've become really close with the band, and that's always nice. And other times I'm trying to disappear into the corner, or I just wait outside the door. And if I feel that I'm welcome and I see something going on, I'll kind of, duck in there, and I'll get that photograph, and then I'll leave so that I'll be invited back in again.
Yeah. It's funny because 25 years ago, bands weren't thinking, oh, there's going to be this thing called Instagram. I know there's a lot of bands back then that were like, no, you can only shoot 3 songs, or you can only come in the dressing room for 1 minute, and it was this weird thing, like, Januelski, who wrote for Cream magazine, used to always say this quote, rock stars are not our friends. And I think that maybe in the 70s, that might have been the case, right? It was like this real division, like almost photographers and writers, like in the movie Almost Famous, like he was the enemy, right? And nowadays we are friends with all these rock stars. They want these photographs. They want us in their dressing rooms. And it depends. It's different on every single level. I mean, you work with Pearl Jam and Foo Fighters and a lot of big bands and a lot of small bands also. And, it's really has shifted in a lot of ways over the last couple of years. So like at the My Morning Jacket shot, it's a shot from the balcony. I'm not sure if you're seeing the shots or not. It's the first shot, if you want to go back to that. So you're just kind of walking around, like, again, you have no agenda. So you're just like up there. It's a wide shot. They're rocking out. Carl's in midair. Patrick, the drummer, is just, hair flying. Jim is, like, this is just you, were you anticipating this shot because you knew it was coming and you wanted to get the full band, or were you just like walking in the balcony and it was like, there it was,
Well, you know what? I have a couple of favorite spots. Being in the pit is really nice, and I enjoy it. And there's moments there that you can get. I love being behind the drum kit or behind an amplifier, and if someone trusts you, you can pop out and get a shot of that shows the relationship of the band to the audience to the venue, which is great. And then I'm always trying to also think about, like, man, I want one great shot of the entire band where everybody's just in that moment. And so that seemed like a good spot to me. I actually remember going up there and thinking that. I thought, let me see if I can get the whole band, when they're really firing on all cylinders, which happens often with My Morning Jacket. But it was cool to get up there and just, and that was shot on film. So, I imagine I didn't know I had it until a couple days later.
The other thing is small theaters like the Cap have these great balconies, but some theaters, the balconies are really far back. That's another beauty of the Cap, is that the balcony is actually fairly close, whether you're over on the side in one of those boxes or all the way in the back straight on. You're really not that far away from the band. All right, Danny, we're going to show a couple of Wilco photos that you took here. And this is a similar thing. I have 2 shots that are in the book. I believe actually both of these are digital. And I actually think the shot that we use in the book is a digital shot of MMJ.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Could be.
But hence the file name, I could tell. But
right.
But anyway, again, here's a Wilco shot. And to me, you're not in the pit. It's a wide shot of the whole band.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing like maybe the same kind of thing, no real agenda, but you're in the crowd, maybe with some friends, and you saw a moment. and you went for it and it was a wide shot because there's heads in the shot and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's how I can tell you're not in the pit because you're maybe, 10, 8, 6, 8 people back or something like that.
I remember that show. I was out of town and I knew they were playing, and the Cap is a decent train ride or a long car ride away from my spot in New York City. And I got back, I was on the road, and man, I hate to miss a Wilco show. I love that band so much. And I wasn't sure I was going to make it or not. I probably called Pete and said, "Hey, I'm going to make it. Is it sold out? What's the deal?" And I just remember showing up with my just my camera over my shoulder. And I most times, I'll drop in and say hi to the band and that. But I just recall going to that show and just really being there to be a fan.
You were an audience member.
I just can't help myself.
Right.
I saw this great show and I was there, and I like sometimes being from the fan perspective too. It's really cool to shoot through the heads and the hands, cheering and all that sort of stuff. Cause it just puts you, it puts you there. And so I really remember, that was completely just me going as a fan and pulling out my camera. When you guys were like, "Hey, send us some stuff that you shot at the Cap," I was like, I just really like those images. Cause again, you see the whole band. It's not necessarily a long lens shot of the lead singer at the microphone. And you really feel a little bit more of the atmosphere and what's going on there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, it's nice to be in the audience and feel those, sweaty bodies. That sensual, sweaty feeling of being.
I want to get back to it. Come on.
Yeah. Right. Boy. It was weird being in that venue, the Great American Music Hall, the other night with 2 patrons. They actually put the tickets up on the site where they buy tickets for sale, and then they were given away as a contest to these 2 people. So they marked it as a sold out show. If you went on the ticket site for the Great American Music Hall, it said sold out because they gave them away to these winners. But boy, and
I wanted to shoot that show, Jay, but they wouldn't let me in. They said you had it covered.
Yeah. Yeah, you were gonna fly in. So, all right, Danny, I got one more question for you because I know you got to go.
Yeah, thank you.
You do a lot of directing of moving pictures.
Yeah.
These days, what do you like better? Do you like directing or do you like stills? Your OG, original vocation of shooting stills.
I like them both for different reasons, but I'll tell you, when you're making a concert film, it's kind of cool because it's more teamwork, than individual. And it's really a great feeling when you have a team that you really trust. And early on in my filmmaking, I was always like, even if it was a great DP, and not to take anything away from anybody, I often would be like, "Well, give me that camera. I got to make sure, you're seeing what I'm seeing." Or, of course, now it's multi-camera and, you're sort of, directing a team of people. And if I can finally let those guys do their job, and they're all really good at it, and gals, I can then photograph at the same time, like I can get everything rolling, get it firing and get in there and do some photographs as well. So it's kind of a win-win on both sides. So,
right. So
I like them both.
When you're directing, then you're typically not holding a video camera or a DSLR or a RED or whatever. You're typically directing creatively from afar, which is typically what I do also at this point. I mean, I've called a lot of shows on headsets with multicams, but I don't love doing that anymore. I would prefer to be the creative force and then let everybody do their thing. Like you said, when you trust them, you have great filmmakers and DPs.
I have also, when I made Let's Play 2 with Pearl Jam, I always had, and I do this all the time, I always had like a Blackmagic camera or a Super 8 or something near me, so that when I see something that I know I'm getting it and I can just fly it in there. A lot of times also, considering my relationship with artists, they're not going to allow, just say, or they're not comfortable, or even I'm not comfortable with sending in a sound guy and a big camera and somebody, and I just take this little Blackmagic or a little Sony and go in there and I just like get the little really intimate things that you can't get with a big crew. So
that's funny. I say the same thing. It's like people will trust me to be 3 inches away from them, but they're not going to let you do that. So, all right, Danny, I know you got to go. Thanks for dropping early on. Appreciate the contribution to the book. Let's hopefully get a longer conversation going between you and me and my photos and stories show.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sometime in the summer. I'm doing them every 2 weeks, every other Sunday. I think we're into July at this point, but I'll reach out to you and maybe end of July or early August, you and me will get on and chat for an hour or two on photos and stories.
I'm sure we could do that for more than an hour.
Yeah. All right. Cheers. Thanks, man. All
Thanks,
right.
everybody. I appreciate it. All
See
the
you.
best.
Enjoy your Sunday. All right, everybody. So we're going to move on here. And I'm going to introduce a woman named Stephanie Susanjara. Stephanie's my co-host for today's program. And Stephanie and I have worked on a whole bunch of different projects together over the last, 7 or so years. She's a professional writer based in Westchester. And when Pete and I decided we were going to do this book, and he said, who's going to write an essay? I said, I've got the perfect person in mind. I didn't even mention who her name was because it wouldn't mean anything to Pete. He said, all right, I know you got this covered. He trusted me. I was producing this book for Pete. And so I went to Stephanie, and it was funny because later on, Pete was like, wait, I thought you were going to hire, the $9 million Rolling Stone feature editor guy who's famous all around the world. I'm like, no, we can't do that. I needed somebody that was in the trenches, that goes to the Cap all the time, that knows that room, knows the fans, knows the people, knows the staff, lives in Westchester, can go to the Westchester Historical Society, can do all this research. And I said to Stephanie, why don't you write an essay that's like 1,000 words or 1,500 words? And what did Stephanie do? She came back with a 6,000 word essay. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. How do we cut it down a little bit? And so Stephanie, why don't you tell us, I think we ended up at around 4,000 words. The essay is absolutely brilliant. It really, really digs deep into the history of the Cap from the beginning when it was built through all of the different eras of being a rock palace. And there were a few of them, one in the early 70s and then another one in the late 80s, I believe it was. Stephanie will tell us all of that. But everybody, here's Stephanie Susanjara, and tell us a little bit about the essay and your research and what's in the essay and what people can learn from reading this epic history of the Capitol Theater.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Hi, everyone. First, I'd like to say that this was a great, just a great, exciting project for me because I'm a Cap regular. I'm part of the Cap fam. My first show at the Cap was the second show ever, which was a head count show with Bob Weir and the Roots on September 5th, 2012. And back then I went with my good friend, Dana Taft-Patuka, who gave me this shirt, Pete Shapiro for President. And Dana and I were close concert buddies, and she eventually became a rail rider. So we kind of parted ways where I just became a Cap fam member, going to the Cap and hanging out with all my friends there. House Right is where all the people that are really regulars hang out, as well as the rail riders. So, but anyway, the other thing I loved about writing this is that my background is in creative nonfiction writing. And under that banner is a type of journalism called immersion journalism. So to be able to write a long form essay, that's what I'm really passionate about, is to just dig very deep into a story. So as Jay said, the Cap has a long history, illustrious history, going back to 1926, when it was built by an architect, Thomas Lamb. And he was a premier movie palace architect at the time. He had built about 300 movie palaces around the world, and the Cap was one of his masterpieces. And what was interesting, there's just so many things that were interesting about what he did. But by the time he built the Cap, the movie palaces, they were really kind of combining a lot of different architectural styles. So the Cap is representative of that. And it was supposed to be, these movie palaces were supposed to be a place where people could go and kind of jump into a fantasy world. And the Cap architecture really shows you that. When you first walk in, there's all these incredible motifs of flora and fauna. There is the dome ceiling, looks like you're looking up to the heavens. And it's just, it's kind of a mashup of different styles. And another thing about the Cap, it was and other movie palaces of this time, is that they were very opulent. And the reason is because before there were full-length movies, there were Nickelodeons, and only really like the lower classes and the working class would go to Nickelodeon theaters, and the upper classes was still going to see live theater. So the Movie Palace Theater was also built so to kind of attract the more upper echelons of society. And the Cap in 1926 was really a hybrid of live theater and a movie theater, because the shows were always both types of theater were on the bill. So the first, if we can show Jonathan, there is an article, Broadway Atmosphere and Zest to Premiere. This is an article that shows the opening of the Cap in 1926. And the theater, the bill that night, they had 5 vaudeville acts, followed by a movie, The Sea Wolf by Jack London. And that's this is an article that I found at the Westchester County Historical Society that was about when the Cap first opened. And if you go a little further in the slides, you'll see that there was a marching band. It's a little bit further down. When on that opening night, they had a marching band to announce the opening of the theater, and there are all these lights. The whole marquee had thousands of light bulbs that illuminated the front of the theater.
So Steph, so when did it first become a rock palace? When did bands first start to play at the Cap?
Well, okay, so fast forward, the Capitol Theater became basically a movie theater in about 1930 as vaudeville died down and everyone just started going to the movies, the upper classes, the lower classes. And in the late 60s, in 1968, the theater was purchased by another theater owner, a regional movie theater owner, Philip Steinberg, and he bought the theater, and he was working on trying to get people were not going to as many movies at that point, and he was working to try different things. So in 1969, he was actually screening like adult films, and there was a raid at the Cap for this. And then he finally leased the Capitol to this famous promoter, Howard Stein. And Howard Stein was a rock promoter who, before he leased the Cap in 1970, July 1970, before he released it, before he leased the Cap, he was booking venues in Queens, the Queens Pavilion. And he was excited to be able to run the Cap and show shows there, because there was a clause where he couldn't have shows in New York City because Bill Graham was operating the Fillmore East. So by booking the Cap, now Howard Stein could book the same bands that were playing the Fillmore East.
And so what were some of those bands that ended up playing at the Cap in 70, 71, and what's some of the history behind that?
So this Howard Stein era lasted for about 18 months, which is pretty incredible, because during that time there were every major band that we love went through there. Joe Cocker, Derek and the Dominoes, Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead played they played some of their most famous shows at that time, 13 shows during that 18-month period at the Cap. And I just want to mention that, I interviewed a lot of different people for the book, and one couple, Judy and Ken Lee, who I have pictures of, that Jonathan can go back to, they were ushers at the Cap, and they had actually worked with Howard Stein in Queens, and they came with him to the Cap, and they were ushering there, and they were also ended up taping about 100 shows at the Cap during that period. So
I have a funny story about Ken and Judy Lee real quick. So Judy's brother is a guy named Mark Cohen. He was one of my best friends. He actually was at my wedding. He died about 20 years ago. And so long before I knew Ken or Judy, and I see them regularly when I come to the Cap, I was hearing about Ken and Judy Lee from Mark, her brother, about, they were ushers at the Cap, and he had all these recordings and posters, and they were historians. And so, nowadays, every show I go to, Phil show at the Cap, Ken and Judy are there. They're sort of, ambassadors to the Cap, from that old 60s, or rather early 70s time up until now. So it's amazing that they're still together and they're still coming to the Cap, 50 years later. But anyway, continue, Steph.
Yeah, so they told me some really cool stories. For example, they were there for this Joe Cocker show. And in those days, there used to be 2 shows every night. There would be a 7 o'clock show and an 11 o'clock show. And one of the reasons is that they didn't sell any alcohol back then or merch really. So all the money had to be made off of ticket sales. So there would be 2 shows, and the Cap was infamous for having these shows late at night that would go to like 3 in the morning. And later on, Hot Tuna would play, were famous for playing till very late. So the night that Joe Cocker played on his Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour, they had sound problems with the first show, and the show started late. And by the time the second show ended, everyone was going out. It was like 5 or 6 in the morning. And Ken remembers going outside, like kind of bleary-eyed, leaving the Cap, and it was daylight. So
Steph, who's this guy sitting up on the marquee here? There's a shot of a guy on the Cap marquee. What's his name? And didn't you interview him?
Yes, that is Dennis Baciccio. So Dennis, he had ended up being head electrician at the Cap during this period, but he started working before Howard Stein even got there. He started working with Philip Steinberg, the regional theater owner, in '68. And he started really kind of, when he was working at the Cap, he was a jack of all trades, really like changing the marquees, selling popcorn, and then doing all the electrical work. So it was really kind of like a grassroots effort.
And then who's Marvin Ravikoff? There's a clipping here from the local newspaper where you could see the Cap marquee, and it's all completely dilapidated, and they're dumping debris out into a truck. Tell me about Ravikoff and when he took over, and how that kind of got us to Pete.
Okay, yeah. So what happened was Howard Stein left the Cap in '72. He went back to 71 rather. He left when Bill Graham closed the Fillmore East. Howard Stein saw this as his chance to kind of break in again to the New York City music world as a promoter. So he went back and he went to work at the American
the Academy of Music, which was later the Palladium.
Exactly. So so then some other promoters came in, one of whom I also interviewed, Eddie Claridge, who was there from like '73 to '75. And at this point, a lot of the bigger artists that had come through during Howard Stein, they were now playing arenas. So he wasn't getting like as many great bookings. And then in '77, the town of Portchester announced an ordinance where you couldn't have live music after 1 in the morning. And then that pretty much put the nail in the coffin on the Cap, and it went dark. And then in 1982, Marvin Ravikoff, who you're talking about, he was a local real estate developer with a background in historic preservation. He bought the theater and he fell in love with it and decided that he wanted to restore it to its glory days. And he put about $2 million into renovating the Cap. And I interviewed Dennis, who told me a lot about the Howard Stein era. And then Marvin, I also had the pleasure of interviewing him. He's a real character. And he told me that when he first got to the Cap, there was water, like in the place where, in front of the stage where you now have the photo pit, there were pigeons, there were cups floating around, all the electrical was damaged. So he's really responsible for saving the Cap then. It could have really gone to the wayside, which most of these movie palaces have been torn down. So that's Marvin, and he had the Cap through up until Pete came on the scene. So Pete Shapiro, I'll just segue to Pete's era.
And that's that first shot, Healy, that we have there with Stephanie's name on it. You can see there's Pete and Marvin, a little bit older than in that newspaper clipping. So Pete and Marvin connect. And go ahead, Steph, because we're going to wrap you up and move on to photos in a second here.
Yeah, so Pete had his eyes on the Cap, and he, at first, Marvin was he wanted to lease it from Marvin. Initially, Marvin was reluctant because he didn't know who this guy Peter Shapiro was. And once Peter shared his vision, he gained Marvin's trust, and Marvin thought, okay, maybe this guy can really, even take it up to another notch and take it back to its glory days of rock and roll. And so Pete was able to lease the theater, and then he did another $1 million reservation. And I spoke to a lot of people about that. This is in the essay, quote material from Jonathan Healy, who told me about a lot of the technical advancements that are at the Cap, the state-of-the-art sound, the projections on the wall. So that Marvin was the one that Pete Shapiro was able to lease the Cap from. And then a few months after the Cap opened under Pete's tutelage, Pete bought the Cap from Mark.
Awesome. All right. So Healy, are you on the shot where we could see the Cap lobby in black and white from the newspaper clipping? And then right after that shot is the same lobby, a photograph that I took for Pete Shapiro of the lobby in current days. You can see still very ornate, and Pete really stayed true to renovating it to, that, glorious look, but with, the cool carpeting and the cool wallpaper and keeping the vibe of the Capitol Theater. So we're going to move on to photography. So the first show that Pete Shapiro did at the Capitol Theater was Bob Dylan. And we don't have any photographs from that show. We have a clipping from Rolling Stone magazine. There was a shot by a New York Times photographer, I believe. And perfect, it's perfect because today is Bob Dylan's birthday also. It's his 79th birthday. And we are going to talk to one of our photographers in a little bit, Charlie Gross, about him shooting Bob Dylan at the Cap. But anyway, so right after Bob Dylan started, Pete and the Cap crew really knew that they needed to have regular photographers up there documenting this pop culture history. And so before we get into our first photographer, who is going to be Andrew Blackstein, I want to give a shout out on these two photos. So this first one is a shot of the crowd with their hands in the air and water flying in the air. And that's during widespread panic. And that's chilly water when everybody in the audience throws the water up in the air. That was pre-corona, before things traveled in the air and killed you. Or got you sick. And this is taken by Josh Timmermans. Josh is Widespread Panic's photographer. He's one of my partners at the Locken Music Festival, is on the photo team. And he has two photos in the book. I just want to give him a shout out for this shot and another one of Widespread. He's Widespread's photographer, is how you might know him, but he's out there creating a lot of work all the time. And then we got the next one is Green Sky Bluegrass, and that's shot by Dylan Langile, and Dylan's Colorado photographer, now living in California, Lake Tahoe, another dear friend of mine. And also Dylan out there, just, he's Green Sky's photographer. So you know him from Green Sky Bluegrass, but also shoots all sorts of music festivals and works with all sorts of bands that we all love, and out there, really creating a legendary body of work. One of my favorite photographers. So Josh and Dylan, not on the Zoom with us, but they both have photos in this book. We get to Andrew Blackstein. Steph, why don't you do a little intro on Andrew, and then Andrew can talk about his shots here and starting with the Disco Biscuits.
Okay, great. It is my pleasure to introduce Andrew Blackstein. He's somebody that I know from the Cap. I've seen him there all the time, not only on the main room, but also at Garcia's, photographing emerging bands. He is a photographer based out of Nyack, New York. He's also been a house photographer at the Brooklyn Bowl, and he also works as a team photographer at the Peach Festival and at Camp Bisco. And he's also worked a lot with the Disco Biscuits, Fish, Trey, and J-Rad. So take it away, Andrew.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. How's everyone doing? All right. So yeah, these first Disco Biscuit shots were from February of 2019, and the first slide really shows off Johnny R. Good's lighting designs. He's a longtime Disco Biscuits lighting director, and he does a really phenomenal job lighting that band up. These were interesting shows. I was backstage with the band, I believe for these shows. I was working for them, and Barber and Brownie and Magner and Allen were working through Help Slip Franklin's because it is the Capitol Theater, and they wanted to do a little nod to the Grateful Dead. So it's always interesting getting that backstage view where not many fans get to see. Kind of piggybacking off of what Danny was saying, it's nice having that trust from the artists.
All right, and then we have a shot of a Bonnevere in shadow. Tell me about that and what's going on there.
Okay, so this was a show from 2016. It was the 22 A Million tour, And I think Bon Iver for that run did maybe 12 shows in New York City. There was some in Radio City Music Hall. There was one at the Capitol Theater, and then there was a couple in Brooklyn. And this was towards the end of that tour. I will inject that it was the best concert I saw that year, hands down, both sound-wise and visuals. But the interesting thing about this photo was that his manager came up to me before the show and told me that Justin, who we see in this photo, does not want his face photographed. So all of the shots that I had to take either needed to be in the shadows like this one, or with something obstructing his face, which is unusual because I like to capture emotion. I like to capture, moments where you can really see in the performer's face what's going on. But it worked out because of these shots that I submitted not only to the Capitol Theater, but to Justin's manager. I got hired to do the last 2 shows in Brooklyn after that, and I believe one of the photos got used for the New York Times.
Nice. And then Portugal the Man, you've got some cool shots of them.
Yeah, this was another interesting show and another interesting story. I mean, as photographers, we know that you can never use a flash for a concert, but we were given specific instructions before the show by the band to use a flash. I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because I was really happy with the projections and the shadows and the lighting design that they had for that run. I don't know how it would have turned out with a flash, but I went with my gut and got the shots that I got without the flash. It was another really spectacular show. I believe they did a Metallica intro on that tour. It was after their latest album, Woodstock, came out, I want to say. But that was a real fun one. And the last 2 are not your typical Capitol Theater shows, as we do get a lot of jam bands that come through. So these were nice and unique.
And then, of course, you got Twiddle here, again, with some killer lighting. I mean, that's the beauty of all these jam bands, is that these lighting directors have all kind of, sprouted out of the brain of Chris Kuroda and Fish, and has sort of, trying to reinvent their own look and feel of doing that. And it's become an important part of what we document in all of these shows. I know you've worked with Twiddle a lot. I've worked with Twiddle a lot. Super fun band, super animated. Tell me a little bit about, there's the lighting shot, but the shot of the 2 of them down in the middle there, just rocking out.
Yeah, so I've been photographing Twiddle for a long time. I want to say the first time that I saw them was after a Fish show in Saratoga Springs in 2012, and became friendly with the guys. So they have their set things, almost like Fish when they do trampolines for You Enjoy Myself. Twiddle has certain songs where they do something like this, where they both kind of kneel down towards each other. So I knew it was coming. I saw it on the set list backstage before the show, and I was happy that I got it. Not only their movements, but the expression on Gub's face and Mickey's hair while it was long. I really enjoyed their show, and the shot before, Herm did a great job with the lights. The Capitol Theater always seems to light up really well, no matter what band is playing there.
And then the last one for you here is we got Mudcrutch, Tom Petty's band. When I shot them once, which I believe was at Summer Camp Music Festival, I was surprised to see Tom Petty playing bass. I didn't realize that was his role in that band, and a little bit different, but super cool. Just tell me your feelings on, is this the only time you've ever shot Petty? And, just tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. It was the only time that I photographed Tom Petty, not the only time that I saw him. But I remember before this show doing some research about Mudcrutch, and realized that it was Tom Petty's first band, and that they had an album together, and that he did play bass. he was not as animated playing bass as he is when he's playing the guitar, but it was still an unbelievable show. I mean, great musicianship all around. I love that first shot of Tom with his hands up. I know that they've used that as a projection on the walls for certain things when they were doing like a photo montage. So another really special moment, and especially before, you know, Tom passed, it was great to be able to capture that.
Awesome. I think we have a question for you. Steph, you got a question for Andrew?
Yes, Andrew, I'd like to ask you, can you talk a little bit about the difference between if you're working for a band and have all access versus shooting, and you have typically 3 songs if you're shooting at the Cap, if you have 3 songs to go in the pit?
That's actually a very good question. I would always prefer to be shooting for the band and have all access, just based on time, based on content, what I'm able to get. I love shooting for bands like J-Rad and the Disco Biscuits, where they're comfortable enough with me so that I can go backstage and be a fly on the wall while they're rehearsing or laughing or doing whatever. You know, look, it's difficult only getting 3 songs, especially if they're 3 quick songs. I know when I photographed Pearl Jam before, like those songs go by in a heartbeat, and you really need to be on top of what you're doing in order to capture something unique. So I think the biggest difference is the ability to be more creative when you have more time and more access.
Right on. All right. I think next up is Chad Anderson. Steph, you want to intro Chad?
Sure. Chad Anderson is also another familiar face from the Cap. He's a one of the staff photographers. He's from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he has published in various magazines and is a collector of rock posters. His work has been featured on CBS Morning, Newsweek, and the New York Times. So take it away, Chad.
I think we're going to jump into your Joan Baez pictures here first.
All right. So, yeah, Joan, as you know, legendary folk singer that for me, myself, there's few people that you can just mention one name and everybody knows who you're talking about. You know, you say the word Dolly, everyone thinks of Dolly Parton. You think of, you know, Joan Baez. So today, being a special day with Bob Dylan, you know, this photograph of Joan was taken actually on May 5th, 2019, on her final farewell tour, which was the big interest for me because her being a legendary performer from 60s Woodstock, where, you know, I'm only 36. I didn't get to see any of those performers. Some of them have passed away since. For me as a photojournalist, I needed to go capture and see Joan for the first time and for the last time. So these images were actually taken from the side of the house where, you know, as a lot of the photographers, we always love being in the pit, but for certain shows, we don't have the actually access to be in the pit because it's a seated show and you don't want to block people's views. So the big thing is waiting for the artist to actually just turn slightly where you can actually capture like a face besides the mic, you know, of her singing or of him singing, depends on who it is. So these photos, as you can see also, I like them as a black and white image because for me, I like doing monochrome photography. I find black and white photography kind of as a historical piece and just gives that richness. Also brings out like textures that you may not see if you have a colored image.
Yeah, so, it works well with Joan for sure.
Yeah, like her white hair, you know, just the little shadow on like, you know, the little gray hues on a guitar. It just makes her pop. Yeah. So
and you also shot another legendary guy at the Cap, which is of course so important now that we lost him to Corona. John Prine. Talk to me a little bit about you wanting to. Now, the other thing that a lot of people don't know is that when the CAP announces shows, these CAP photographers, Chad and Scott and Gary Flink and Dina, Scott, etc., they all put in to a master list shows they're interested in shooting, and there's a lot of interest in a lot of different shows, and everybody can't be everywhere at once. Mark Millman has small kids. So why did you choose John Prine as somebody you wanted to shoot? And were you psyched when you got that assignment and you were the one that was chosen to come do it?
I was actually, I grew up kind of with like a folky, like my father is a big folk singer, used to play guitar and tour. He actually played Red Rocks back in the day. But for John Prine, there's a local band, this band called Hitchin' the Giddy Up, that actually introduced me to John Prine's music. They used to play, the Spanish Pipe Dream, whenever they played. I'm like, oh, what's that song? That song's really good. You guys write that? He's like, no, that's John Prine. I was like, oh man, I gotta listen to more John Prine. So besides most people knowing Angels from Montgomery, that has been covered by everyone from Susan Tedeschi and Tedeschi Trucks to, Bonnie Raitt, who really made that song famous. I just knew he is one of those legendary folk writers and songwriters that as he gets older, there's fewer and fewer opportunities that you're going to actually be able to see these artists. As a photographer, that actually was one of the biggest things that turned me into becoming a music photojournalist. Was I want to capture these artists before, they're no longer with us. So for John Prine, I was like, oh, legendary performer. I hope no one else chimes in, because I know there's like, everyone may just chime in and be like, oh, I got there too late from the email. But no one chimed in. And as you can see right here, that's actually the concert poster from that night and my little photo pass.
Nice. Awesome. Excellent.
But
we've got anything else on John Prine, or should I move on?
Just, it's a heartbreaking thing. And to be honest, if any of you guys out there are John Prine fans, he's hosting, or his wife Fiona is hosting, a picture book live talk on June 11th as a remembrance. So I hope you all can tune into that.
Awesome. And then your last shot that we have of yours is this great shot of these fans, which is at some sort of a metal show of some sort. Do you like shooting the fans? Do you feel that vibe? Do you feel that energy coming from the audience and like to capture that kind of stuff?
I do, especially when it comes down to, as Andrew was just mentioning, there's a lot of us that go shoot the same kind of jam bands, and the CAP's known for like the jam band community. So when you get like a giant upcoming metal band to come in, it's like, who? So this actually photo is from this Icelandic band Swedish band called Ghost. It was funny because this thing was announced, and then they went from playing the Capitol to actually playing Barclays Center later that December. So, if you look, everyone's got like the horns out. It just makes you like fall in love with just knowing like the emotions that everyone's feeling and just raging against the rail. It's amazing.
Okay, Chad, I have a question for you. I know you also work as a bartender, and you have a strong passion for music photography, where the financial rewards are not always that great. What keeps you coming back?
It's really just comes back to being able to capture a moment in time. Like right now, if I didn't capture John Prine, I would have missed it. As Andrew was saying, he never got to shoot, Tom Petty as just Tom Petty, except with Crutch. If you don't shoot something now this day, who knows if you'll ever have that opportunity to shoot it another time. And it's this whole adage that I've kind of have taken upon myself since being a young photographer. And just like, you have to see these legendary performers while you can. I know ticket prices have gone up a lot over the last 20 years. I'm not spending $40 to see Paul McCartney anymore. And now it's like $200 to see Paul McCartney. But, who knows if Paul will be here tomorrow or not. So it's all about the FOMO, fear of missing out. Yeah. I'm a younger photographer compared to most of the photographers here in the talk. So, there's that whole adage of, don't miss it. You'll never fear or be disappointed that you spent the money after you see the performer, but you will always be disappointed if that person or has passed away and you're like, I knew I should have just went and saw them.
Right on. All right. Well, thanks, Chad. Really appreciate you being part of this and being part of the book. Nice contribution. Next up, we've got Charlie Gross, and I'm going to introduce Charlie. So Charlie is not a cap photographer. Charlie is sort of one of our special guests that we brought in because he had a very unique photo that we wanted in this book. And we'll get to that photo in a minute. But I wanted to just do a little bit of background on Charlie. So he lives in New York City. He did work as a professional photographer full on for a long time, but now he is a psychotherapist. And he founded a thing called Sounds of Saving. It's a music-based mental health initiative. They create original content with musicians, and it works to destigmatize mental health and bring awareness to those resources. He does a lot of cool stuff in psychiatry and in that using the creative side of things. So he went from being a very successful commercial freelance photographer to a completely different career path as a psychotherapist, which is super fascinating because, as we all know, it's not easy to make a full-time living as a music photographer. Yes, you can make money, you can generate revenue. So all those young kids out there asking questions at the end of this event, and by the way, put your questions into any of the areas where you can ask questions on any of the Facebook streams. We've got a guy, our good pal Harrison, out there correlating these questions, and we'll answer some of them later. So the ones of you that are going to say, how do I become a music photographer? Charlie's going to tell you to become a psychotherapist because you'll be able to support your family much easier that way. Not so easy to be a full-time music photographer. So anyway, Charlie Gross worked with the artist Beck, and this first shot that I have here that we threw in is an album cover that he shot of the Mutations record. This is a legendary album cover with a legendary artist who is not always an easy person to work with. I know that from my experience. And if we just flip through a couple of these shots real quick, there's some really beautiful portraits of Beck, indoors and outdoors, a great live shot. Charlie, talk to me about working with Beck. What did you do with him? How did you connect? Were you living in LA at the time? Because he's an LA-based guy. Give me a little bit of background on yourself and connecting with Beck, and let's just start there.
Yeah, I had actually never been to LA until that third photo you showed of him at that's the Griffith Observatory. I had actually never even been to LA. I was such an East Coast guy. I had been interning for Annie Leibovitz.
Come closer. We can barely hear you, Charlie.
You hear me better now?
Yes, better now. Yeah.
Okay. I had been interning for Annie Leibovitz, and which basically means like holding grip and getting cappuccinos. And that assisting career did not go far for me. My best friend had been tour managing Beck in the very beginning of the Odelay tour. So that was that era. And I went to a show at the Roseland Ballroom, shot backstage and the show because he was looking to do like a little bit of a scrapbook, and we really hit it off. It led to kind of a very short U.S. tour, the Ryman, down, Nashville, and like around some of the South and the Mid-Atlantic, and then it just kept building, and it went on for about 2 or 3 years. So it was a really amazing photographic experience. He's a very, very visual person. And very interested in kind of playing with his own persona and reinventing himself visually. So like every location we would end up in would be an opportunity to do something amazing, whether it was Japan or Portugal or anywhere in the US. It was an amazing experience. And I would say that part of the reason why I actually stopped doing it professionally was because like not all the experiences were like that. And I think for some people they do become that way, I think if you stick it out long enough. But that having that experience for a couple of years, and then going into sort of a bit more of a typical getting like a few minutes with someone, didn't hold me as much. But the experience of working with Beck was a really amazing multimedia blitz.
Did the work with Beck lead to other photo work? And that's, you're talking about the stuff that was like short portraits or other live stuff, but it wasn't as fulfilling to you. Is that what?
Yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah.
Beck was your big break that got you kind of in as a professional shooter. You shot that album cover for Geffen Records, I think it was. And then you sort of saw the writing on the wall that maybe this wasn't for you, and you went back to school. Is that what happened?
After a while, yeah. I mean, it wasn't overnight. Yeah, but that third shot was the first time I ever went to LA and hung out with Beck there and did a bunch of stuff there. I think the MTV shot was in his basement, and then the other one was Griffith. Yeah,
Griffith Park. Yeah, I love that outside shot with the ring around his head glowing. It's beautiful.
You know, I think there are a lot of people doing like being tour photographers now, especially like you said with Instagram. I think it's a really needed thing to you know, people need the content, and that intimacy and access is a really beautiful thing for getting, you know, special stuff.
So let's move on to the photo that I wanted from you for this book. It's a picture of Bob Dylan, who, of course, his birthday is today.
Yes.
Mr. Dylan. So most of you guys don't know. So many of you fans that are watching this know that us photographers typically get 3 songs to shoot, 3 songs in the pit and you're out. There's a lot of artists that make you shoot from the soundboard 100 feet back. There's artists that make you only shoot the 3rd, 4th, and 5th songs. There's all sorts of weird stuff. But the rumor is that Bob Dylan is the guy that invented the 3-song rule. You can shoot 3 songs and you're out, right? So thanks for that, Bob Dylan. And the thing about Bob is, for the last 25, maybe even 30 years, Bob Dylan has not let anybody photograph him officially. Like, he does not issue press passes to newspapers, magazines. I mean, there's been exceptions to that rule. I have been lucky to photograph him a few times in weird ways, not because he gave me access, like he sat in with somebody, or I did get a photo pass once for a Berkeley Greek Theater show, and I stuck down front and Neil Young sat in with them. But in general, not easy. So you're at the Capitol Theater as a patron. You bring your camera with you and you're shooting Bob Dylan. Tell me what happens.
Well, I actually went 2 nights. First night without a camera, and the second night I got in with a camera. You know, I knew the environment I was in, which I have to say is a really beautiful thing. Like, as all of you photographers know, having come up in a time when you're like one of maybe a couple people who are able to shoot a show, being surrounded by phones and what that does to the live experience has definitely altered it. So it's actually it's a really nice, special, you feel like you're more in the moment. So I really respect like not having a million phones around. But that said, Dylan's been a central part of my own personal, you know, life, and really wanted to, you know, try and get a shot. So I got in with a camera. Wasn't sure that was going to go. I knew the deal. I had a Fuji X Pro 2 with a fairly long lens. I took, I think, 4 frames before I was escorted out really intensely.
4 frames, 4 photos.
4 frames, digital frames, obviously. You know, and it's the segue. It was interesting that you mentioned like the Beck thing, because like that's like, you know, we all know there's a huge range in access, and nothing could be different than having like the access that I had as a touring photographer with Beck, with like holding this contraband in the, you know, in a Dylan show. 4 frames. I had a feeling what was going to happen. I had an empty memory card in my pocket. And I'm glad I'm not trying to make my living as a, you know, music photographer after I tell this story. Had a empty memory card in my pocket. Was escorted out, cornered against the wall. They demanded the memory card. On my way out while I was being escorted, I swapped out the cards, gave them the empty memory card, and walked out the door. Spent the rest of the night wandering around Port Chester. My wife was still at the show. She had a great time. Saw Port Chester, and it's like it's great to hear Stephanie talk about the history of the Cap, and the whole experience of being in Port Chester is really amazing. And it was actually like a beautiful beautiful night. You know, I saw like one song, two songs, shot, got one beautiful shot, I thought, maybe two, and was really.
Yeah, and I think somebody at the Cap saw it maybe on social media, or somebody told him you had it, and then Brad Tucker. So Brad Tucker is another Capitol Theater, Relix magazine employee, and Brad is really the force behind this Capitol Theater book. He's the one who sort of spearheaded this whole thing with me, and he connected me to you and said, I think this guy Charlie Gross has this shot of Dylan, and we really wanted to put a shot of Dylan in, and you know, it's we'll call it a fan shot taken by a pro or a one-time pro, but we're very happy to have the shot in there. And then you sent me a great shot of Elvis Costello, and I really loved the shot, and I really loved the way he was standing and holding the microphone, the hat that he's wearing, that old-fashioned microphone. It really reminded me of like a radio show in the 40s or something. And so there was something that struck me about that photo, and I asked you if we could use that in the book as well, and you were kind enough to let us do that. So were you there at Elvis as a fan in the audience also for this shot?
Yeah, same deal. Hybrid fan with a camera,
right?
Situation. And yeah, that one was, way more legit. There were no problems with people taking photos, and yeah, it was a beautiful show. I don't have any, great stories of running from the law with that one, but it was a beautiful night. He had nice backup singers, played some classics. His voice sounded beautiful. The lighting was really sweet. Just, there's something special about going to shows at the Cap. I've seen a lot there, and and a number of people have mentioned how important it is to see the legends and see the people that you really love, because I think a lot of people were sort of passing on around that time, and so Dylan, Elvis, Neil Young put on an amazing show at the Cap right after that, I think. Yeah. So.
Well, right on. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for your stories on Photos and Stories. We really appreciate it. I think you're another one of these guys that has to jump now off the Zoom. And so you won't be around for our recap at the end, because I believe you're up in New Hampshire and need to drive to the Catskills to escape the zombie apocalypse that's rolling into New Hampshire. So thanks for joining us. And Charlie, we appreciate your contribution to this book, The Capitol Theater, Volume 1. We'll see you out there again. All right. So moving on, our next photographer is Dino Perucci. And Dino and I have known each other just from mingling together at shows on the East Coast for a good 20 years or so now. I think we met at Mountain Jam. It could have been before Mountain Jam, at a show at the Best Buy Theater or somewhere along the way. I can't remember exactly, but we're 15, 20 years in with Dino. Dino has an interesting career, grew up on Long Island. I think Dino lives in Queens now. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it's New York City, but he's a New York City guy, we'll call it. He started shooting at a young age. He was inspired by the great Jim Marshall, legendary photographer from San Francisco. If you don't know Jim Marshall's work, my next program, Photos and Stories, on June 7th, we're going to skip next week and come back the following Sunday, is going to be with a woman who owns the Jim Marshall estate and archive and represents Jim's work. Her name is Amelia Davis, and we're going to be talking about Jim Marshall's legendary body of work on June 7th here on Photos and Stories. So check that one out in 2 weeks. But, Dino is a regular at Jazz Fest, spending, both weekends in between weeks. He was a house photographer at the Highline Ballroom and the Blue Note Jazz Club and BB King's club until that closed. And of course, he's a Cap Theater regular, and I think a Brooklyn Bowl staff photographer as well. And again, when I keep calling these guys staff photographers, they're freelancers. They're not Cap employees; they are Cap freelancers. But that doesn't change the status of them being family members at the Cap, and we consider them Cap staff and Cap family. So Dino, we've got some photos of yours in here. The first one I want you to jump in here and talk about is shooting Ringo's Star and Ringo's All-Star Band. We've got a great black and white shot, which is the first one. And I also want to mention that all the photos that we're showing in the PowerPoint are not in the book, because on the internet, we can show a gazillion photos and tell a story. And in the book, you're limited to so many pages, and we wanted to get a lot of artists in here. So we're just, we're scratching the surface of the number of artists that are in the book. But at the same time, we're expanding on, you know, so for Ringo Starr, this black and white shot that we're showing up here is the only one that's in the book. But for the presentation, we included a couple of other shots that Dino had sent me of Ringo on stage playing drums and pointing to the audience. And then I love this shot backstage of him giving the peace sign with our dear friend Pete Shapiro. So Dino, talk to me about whatever you want to talk about. Ringo, shooting at the Cap, shooting Jazz Fest. You know, start with Ringo and we'll go to Snoop Dogg from there.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, specific to the book, when you asked about picking a certain photo that was in the book and over the years at the Cab, Ringo came to mind for several reasons. It was a memorable night, and speaking of Peter Shapiro, I was hired by the Cap, you know, to shoot Ringo that night, and but right before the show, Pete was all excited that Ringo was there, and he said, "I think we're going to be able to do a shot backstage. You know, stand by." It was still being worked out with, you know, whoever it had to be worked out with. So long story short, clearly it comes together, and his security comes down beforehand. I remember saying something to me politely, but said to me something to the effect of, "You have 20 seconds," or something like that. So, you know, you're double, triple checking everything and just making sure the moment comes and, you know, everything's right. And so it happens, you see the moment, and he smiled and gave the peace sign, and Peter was all happy. And so I'm all conscious of now, get out of the way. You know, I got my instructions. And Ringo says to me, he goes, "Wouldn't you like one of me? Didn't you want a photo of me? Or you just want?" I looked at him. I said, "Thank you so much, Ringo." And then I took another photo after that, and then got out of there pretty quickly. But that was just such a great memory. Again, for many reasons, I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of my idols, but never a Beatle. That is the only time I can say I met a Beatle. And as far as I know, and the Cap historians can correct me on this, is the only time any Beatle played at the Capitol Theater, which I thought was pretty great too. And then, so the show itself was great. You saw some of those photos. Ringo always plays with his all-star friends, and that night it included Steve Lukather from Toto, Greg Rowley from Santana and Journey, and among others, and Todd Rundgren. And another fun moment I thought of the night was when they did Todd's Bang on the Drum. And you see Ringo and Todd and Greg Bissonette, the other drummer, playing drums on that. And that was fun. And of course, the night ended with a little help from my friends. So you can't go wrong with a night like that at the Cap. And I just thought it was special.
Right on. The next artist we're going to talk about is Snoop. When you shoot an artist like Snoop or something that's, I mean, you usually shoot blues and jam and some jazz. I don't think of you as a hip hop photographer, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you've shot a lot of hip hop. Do you approach shooting something like Snoop differently than shooting another artist?
A bit, and I definitely wouldn't consider myself a hip hop artist either. But having worked all those years at places like BB King and Highline, I mean the musical spectrum was completely across the board. So had some experience, and I guess to that point, you know, if you know the music a little less well, you're just a little more, I guess, aware of what's going on. Not a more aware, but more trying to lock into what's going on in that particular crowd. And you know, it was hazy, but it was fun.
Yeah. All right. So, and this shot of Snoop is in the book. All right. I think I want to move over to you for your last little section here is Alan Toussaint and Galactic. Alan, New Orleans legend, Galactic, New Orleans legends currently. You know, like I said earlier, you're always at Jazz Fest. You've been doing Jazz Fest for a long time. I know you go down for Mardi Gras and Crawfish Fest and this thing and that thing. And New Orleans is almost like a second home to you. I don't know. Do you have an apartment down there? I don't even know if you do. But so talk to me a little bit about shooting Alan, who I've never got to shoot, which really crushes me. And but Galactic, obviously, I shot an album cover for them years ago and other stuff. But this is just so amazing having, you know, Alan Toussaint and Galactic on stage together. Talk to me a little bit about that and your New Orleans connection.
It was amazing. And so the Galactic guys I've known for many, many, many years. It's 96, I believe. And in the meantime, they've played the Cap actually many times. This particular night and these particular photos are from the first time they played at the Cap. And what also, like you alluded to, made that night so special is he wasn't on tour with them, but we had Alan Toussaint as a special guest, and he did an opening set of solo piano.
Okay.
Where that first photo is from in the red suit. And then later on during Galactic set, he came back for 2 more songs with Galactic. And if you're really paying attention, you notice he's wearing a completely different but equally amazing suit in the photos with Galactic, because he was an amazing person. I had the pleasure of meeting him many times, including that night. I brought him some photos from Jazz Fest earlier that year. But anyway, he was just an amazing gentleman, an incredible musician, and one of the best dressers I've ever known. And I literally wouldn't, you know, come back for a second, you know, sit in with a band without having an incredible new suit and just dressed to the nines.
Right on. All right. Quick question for you. I'm pretty sure you have a day job. I think it's a flexible day job. You work for yourself, maybe as a consultant or something like that in the tech space. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, until recently that was correct, but yes.
Okay, yeah, everything has changed recently. I forgot to ask you that the other day when we were going all through the stuff. But you're so busy because you're the house photographer at all these clubs and you're shooting all the time. How do you have time for anything else, or how do you stay organized with your photos and your day stuff? Because I mean, the amount of stuff that you shoot is a full-time gig. Are you organized?
Yes, is the short answer, but there's always room for better organization. I mean, because I do or did, again, and not trying to anyway, because I was shooting so much, I mean, obviously everything had to be cataloged by, you know, date and artist name. And so in general, yes. But one thing that this, let's say this long set break that's unplanned for all of us has allowed me to do is go back into a lot of things. I mean, Jazz Fest folders from, you know, 8, 9, 10 years ago that, of course, I edited some of, but, you know, they're incomplete. Yeah, I'm still finding things that, I'm still constantly finding things now that I have time to look, and I'm not out shooting 3 to 6 nights a week, whatever, you know, whatever it comes out to.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's funny because I have had no shortage of things to do during this, you know, downtime, but I find myself getting vortexed into the 1.7 million digital files I have in my Lightroom catalog, and just go down these rabbit holes. And I've been finding photos and exporting them and emailing them to friends. And yeah, it's just, you know, I've been enjoying it and it's fun, and I don't mind wasting the time because I'm not running. All right. So we're going to move on now to Mr. Gary Flink. Let's see here. And I believe we're going to get Steph to introduce Gary Flink. Gary over in New Jersey. Welcome to the Photos and Stories program. Steph, you got an intro, little bio on Gary?
Yes, I do. Gary lives in North Jersey. Gary works as a physical therapist, has been shooting live music for 10 years, and is the newest member to the CAP team.
Yeah. Right on. So Gary, we have just one photo of yours in the book, and it's, you know, nothing personal. You were a very new shooter to the book to the CAP when we did this. But it's a really important shot for a number of reasons, and it's a picture of Toots and the Toots from Toots and the Maytals, right? And so the first shot that we're showing here is the one that's in the book, and then we have a couple of others that we threw in there because I really wanted to include other things of yours for you to tell the story. So I believe this was like the first time that Toots was back on tour again after a break. Why don't you give us a little background on this shoot here? and also tell me a little bit about how you connected with the Cap Theater.
Yeah. So first, thank you, Jay, Stephanie, Bradley, putting this together, putting the book together, Steph, May, Healy. It's awesome. It's great to be a part of this. So thanks for all the organization, all the work here. This was actually the first show that I shot for the Cap. As Stephanie mentioned, I'd been shooting music photography for 10 years. Was a contributing editor for, contributing photographer for an online publication, and started getting access and DSLR privileges and building my portfolio. And I reached out to Steph May a number of times, and I had shot a lot of shows at the Cap for bands, for artists, for the PR companies, but not as an official Cap photographer. And so this show, the show with Toots was the first show in that capacity. So I certainly remember it, always remember it very well. He was, I don't know if it was the first show that after he had taken a break, he got hit with a vodka bottle on stage. Some fan, well, not a fan, someone in the crowd threw a vodka bottle, hit Toots in the head. I think that was either 2012, 2013. And then he didn't tour for a lot of years. I'm not quite sure how many. I think it was 3 or 4 or so. So this show at the Cap, I believe, was his first show at the Cap, at least since that incident. It might have been his first show since the incident itself. Just not 100% sure. But you know, he's a legend, obviously. You know, Chad Anderson mentioned it before about opportunities to shoot the legends because they may not be around for a long time. You know, I actually reached out to Steph and asked if I could shoot John Prine. For that reason, I'm a huge fan. But you know, he's a legend. I mean, he looks awesome. He looks amazing in these photos. I think he's close to 80. He's late 70s. Ton of energy. The show was amazing. The crowd was super excited. I was super excited, you know, to be shooting it. So it was a ton of fun.
Right on. Steph?
Okay, yes, Gary, what is it? I read that you were doing landscape and wildlife photography. What made you transition to rock photography, or do you still do both, or what turned you on about rock photography?
Yes, so I've been a musician my whole life. Play guitar, play harmonica. Got into photography at a young age. You know, mostly wildlife landscapes, just other things that I love. Always wanted to get into music photography, especially with my background, but just never had the opportunity, never really had access. The point and shoot technology, the cameras, you know, certainly advanced tremendously over the past, God, who knows, 15, 20 years or so. And so I started, you know, bringing a point and shoot camera into different venues, which they allow. You know, it doesn't have a lot of focal length, but just, you know, shooting the with the best quality that I could do with the cameras, you know, that I was able to get in, and ended up, you know, you got to get up super, super close because you don't have that zoom capability. So, you know, getting up to the front of the stage area and standing there for ungodly amounts of hours, just waiting because you can't be too far away. That's certainly a tip for photographers. If you're going to do that, you know, don't drink any beer before a show, because you may stand there for 3 hours finally, and then you have to run out of there. But I started to build a portfolio with that point and shoot, you know, photos that I was able to take, and then put that together. As I said before, I got asked by an online publication to be a contributing photographer. Then I had photo access with a DSLR. It just kind of grew from there. My time was limited. So then I just started reaching out to the bands, the PR companies on my own, and just, you know, telling them who I was. I had my portfolio built at that point, asking them if I could, you know, shoot their shows. And a lot of times, or often enough, I was given access. And, you know, I've been doing this for the Cap since 2018, but I travel around and with all access passes at times to shoot various bands in different parts of the country. Was out at Red Rocks this past summer and spent an entire day with John Butler, who I also shot at the Cap, just not for the theater, and just photo documenting the whole day. So that's how I transitioned from kind of what I did to always what I wanted to do, which is music photography.
Right, but it's a serious hobby for you, more or less, because you're making a living as a physical therapist and supporting your family that way. But you have the FOMO also, the fear of missing out, and you love rock and roll, and you shoot wildlife, but shooting bands on stage or bands in general, that's wildlife also, because they're all living that wild fucking life in the rock and roll world. All right, Gary, thank you so much for joining us. Stick around. We're going to talk about tech talk at the end of things. All right, next up, we are going to introduce our pal, Mark Millman. Many of you guys who are CAP regulars know Millman, shoots at the Brooklyn Bowl a lot. Millman is a New York City-based photographer. Millman is shooting full-time. He transitioned from an insurance business to doing just photography more or less full-time. I know Millman from Fire Island. He vacations out there and has a house in the summers, and as do I. And so I remember first seeing Millman because he'd be putting up signs on telephone poles advertising his services for beautiful sunset beach family photos and kid photos and whatnot. And he's turned that into a full-time business of shooting rock stars and shooting rock star toddlers who are probably even more wild than the rock stars living that life of drooling all over themselves. But Millman has created a great body of work. And so, Mark, we're going to start with you with an important show, which is this Bob Weir show at the CAP. And I don't know the exact date, maybe you do, but it was the show where Bobby's wearing the blue cowboy hat. So why don't you jump in and tell us the story about this particular show and the blue cowboy hats?
Hey, everyone. That was his 69th birthday, October 16th, 2016. And, we had communication a day or two before. Stephanie or Brad or maybe both had reached out and pointed out that they were going to do something for the birthday at the end of the night. So we should be ready for that. I kind of anticipated it because, as you had mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of things for Phil over the years at his birthdays with cakes and whatnot. So, it was a really great night. Bob brought a really big band. It was interesting to see him with such a big, interesting band. I don't remember where everyone came from, but I think a couple of guys from the National were in the band. And so it was just a really interesting quality of his music that night. And then at the end of the show, they do what they do a lot up at the CAP, which, I guess is reminiscent of probably stuff you saw all the time when Bill Graham used to do all his special stuff at all the venues out in San Francisco. And they handed out these funky sky blue cowboy hats to everybody. And the whole audience threw them on, and everyone on the stage got them in their hands or on their head, and then they brought the cake out. So it was just really cool to see Bobby surprised. And it was just one more of those things that I think working at the CAP, because most of us take pictures at a lot of different venues around the city or around the country, every venue doesn't do what these guys actually do. They don't go the extra mile. They don't think about every one of those last little details. And when you draw in the fans and you draw in the band with funny things like cowboy hats to celebrate Cowboy Bob, it was just, one of those really cool moments.
Yeah, I love this. The birthday cake shot is great. And I think it's one of those great moments where Pete came out, and I'm sure Pete or Steph or somebody had this idea to do the blue cowboy hats. And the shot, the last shot in this little series is from the balcony where you could see everybody in the audience is wearing those blue hats. And that actually is a cell phone shot that was taken by Brad Tucker, who, works for the company. Mark didn't take that shot, so don't mistake that for one of his. But it just, it's those special moments that Pete and his team are always creating. And then Pete and his team also, realizing that this stuff needs to be documented, and bringing somebody like Millman in to photograph this. He's going to be there. He's going to be in the right place to get the shot, the birthday cake and the blue hat and everything. And so, again, another great pop culture moment, created, perpetuated, and executed by the CAP staff and Pete Shapiro, and documented by staff photography.
Golf clap, everybody! Golf clap! Come on, participate! A little golf clap.
All right, and so now we go to this Buddy Guy shot, and when I asked you photographs to put into this presentation, Mark, actually this is not one that you asked me to put into, but I really love this shot. I've shot Buddy Guy a bunch of times. I know you have as well, because I stood next to you at Jazz Fest one year when Buddy Guy was playing, and Buddy Guy runs out into the audience all the time and does this almost at every show. Yeah. And so you obviously knew this was going to happen, and this looks like it's taken up in the balcony. So did you follow up in the balcony, or were you waiting up there for him to come up there?
No, because I actually started, you know, I mean, it's kind of the training that I think me and Dino and maybe you have a little bit from Jazz Fest, but this was like a marathon. I started with him, I believe, down on the floor downstairs. I wasn't sure if he was actually going to go all the way upstairs or not. I mean, it's Buddy. He's in good shape, but he's not that young. And he made his way all the way up. If you actually look at that picture on the right side of the frame there, that's Ken that runs security. And he was like running around, and him and I believe Scotty from the team were there kind of keeping everyone back. And I just kept pushing along and pushing through, because I just knew that upstairs it was all so much tighter. And I just figured there'd probably be a moment where people would be around him, because if you saw him in a club, like when Dino used to get him at like BB King's all the time, you're always kind of caught between tables and you get people right tight around him. But you know, in venues, that's the thing, right? Every venue is a little different. When you're at the bowl, you're in the crowd if you move out of a pit, and we don't even have a pit at the one in the city. You know, here at the Cap, it was just, I figured I got to follow him and see where this takes me. And I kind of backed the people up a little bit and apologized with one hand in the air as I was moving back, and clicked off a couple of frames of him right in the middle of that crowd there.
Yeah, I love it with the fisheye lens. It works great. And yeah, that's the shot. You want to get him surrounded by the fans. And I was going to give a shout out to Kenny Schneider, also the security guard over on the right, because Kenny's a good dude and he's Cap family, and he looks out for us photographers all the time. And I like how he's sort of being a Secret Service agent over there and trying to blend into the crowd.
He was much more serious in the early days.
Yeah. Next shot for you is Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. Talk to me a little bit about this particular shot.
This was kind of just cool, and it meant a lot to me. When Soundgarden got back together again for that first reunion tour, I think around 2011, they ran a contest nationally, and they chose one photographer in each city where the show was going to be. They did Jones Beach here, and I won this competition where the band chose who they liked, and I got to shoot the show. So it was my first time getting to shoot a band that I had been seeing since, I don't know, back in college. I guess around, I think the first Lollapalooza was probably about the first time I saw them. And I had shot Chris before this, and I got a contact from Brad a couple of months before the show went down saying that Chris's people wanted to see some pictures of what the room looked like seated, because they were considering using the venue, but it was a seated show and they were curious. So I sent some pictures back to them of the room, and I included a note that said, well, clearly then I want this show if it comes down. So when it came down, I was really excited because I just knew it was a dynamite time to see him. You know, and I think Chad said it earlier. I mean, you know, some nights you really work in that pressure of 3 songs, right? I think it's really good, to be honest, for the most part, to be forced to get your work quickly. But when you're working with things like artists that are playing acoustic, or it's a seated show, and you're pinned to that one angle, like Chad said, you kind of really need to work to get shots. So I believe for this one, I actually kind of snuck up and down the aisles a little bit, but I did it all in that like first 2 or 3 songs they gave. And, you know, it was just nice to see him give that emotion he had. And, you know, again, I guess Chad gets all the credit when I talk about this photo, but, you know, he said it. I would have never thought that we would have lost Chris Cornell the way we lost Chris Cornell, you know? And so not that far down the road from this, I mean, I really don't remember now. That was Saturday, the 25th of June, 2016. So I don't really remember when he passed, but
he passed in 2017 in May of 2017, I think.
Right. So literally just under a year later, he's gone, you know, and it's just kind of really hard to believe. And so, you know, I think that's where we're lucky. I mean, I always say there's a little bit of a curse to us taking pictures because personally, I find it hard to go to a show and not have a camera at this point. So, you know, I always feel like if I'm in that position, I'm missing out on something that I want to capture, like you said, the FOMO. But when you're there and you get a chance to make an image and then you realize a couple of years later or 2 months later how poignant it can actually be, you know, I think that's really what makes this special. And you know, you said it already. We don't get paid a lot, at least up front. I mean, Danny said the same thing. I mean, nobody's bigger than Danny. But at the end of the day, it's if you get a great image and it gets out to the right places and maybe some people want to purchase it down the road. So I always just feel like you have to work hard to make something good happen here because, you know, there's so much out there now. You want something that people are going to remember, hopefully, afterwards.
So the next shot is a picture of Wayne from the Flaming Lips riding a unicorn through the crowd. You and me were talking about this the other day. You know, I had the set list. I've been working with the Flaming Lips since 1989. These guys are good friends of mine. And so I knew this was going to happen, and I chose to go up into the balcony to try and shoot down. But I really love this shot that you took from the pit. And you didn't really know this was going to happen. You were waiting for the bubble shot.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you know, Wayne comes cruising by, and you're just in the right place at the right time. I mean, it's just a really, really amazing shot. I really, really love it. But I want you to talk about the next photo because, like Dino, this is the Foundations of Funk, I believe. Like Dino, you're a New Orleans guy. You're down at Jazz Fest all the time. You spend, you know, I always joke that you wear the same pair of shorts for 14 days straight.
I have 3 pairs I rotate.
Got it. All right. I guess I'm always just there where you're wearing the same ones. And
like you're always looking at my ass, though. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there you go. Yep, you're always in front of me, getting in the way. And so Foundations of Funk, Zigaboo, George, Cyril Neville, you know, legendary royalty of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say particularly about shooting these guys?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, the next pictures we're going to go into are pretty special to me too. But truthfully, I mean, of what we're showing here today, this picture probably means the most to me. The Nevilles and the Meters were the first New Orleans music that I really knew, you know, other than thinking about stuff like Blueberry Hill that, you know, from when you're a kid or whatever, some of the, you know, early classics. And I was lucky enough to see the Meters pretty early on in college in '88, I think, when they started playing together again. And I actually flew out to San Francisco when the original 4 did that first reunion at the Fillmore out there. And I think it was 2000. And, you know, I've known George a long time and Zig and even really Cyril. So it's just special when you get to know these musicians really well. And you know, this is a special thing. I mean, like a lot of older bands, they don't all necessarily get along great all the time and want to play together all the time or not. But, you know, to me, those two, Zig and George, that's the best rhythm section ever. Any type of music, I'll take those two guys any day of the week. And, you know, if you know New Orleans music, then you know this. Like Cyril Neville's probably the most underrated, soulful voice in like all of New Orleans. You know, and those guys right there, that's family. I mean, even like the bands, they probably have a little bit of blood in there as well. That's not blood of family members. But, you know, when you see these bands and they do special things like that show where you get to hear all that Meters music, it's special and it's fun.
Right on. All right, let's go through Jane's Addiction real quick here and then keep moving on. It's getting late here. It's 12:40 in California. Jane's Addiction, you've worked with them a bunch. They're such a great band to shoot live. I've been shooting them also for many years, and I can attest to the energy that comes off that stage. Talk to me a little bit about this particular shoot at the Cap. You know, the girls hanging by the hooks in their skin, everything that's going on in here.
Yeah, you know, the Jane's thing was cool, and it's a total Pete Shapiro thing for me. Like really just about everything that I consider big that I've got my hands on. You know, when they opened the Bowl in Vegas, I was doing a photo shoot in Brooklyn with Carl Denson's Tiny Universe in the space that they were booking stuff out of across the street from the Bowl. I think it's actually where Vice has TV studios now. and the booking agent was sitting in this one little office by himself with like a space heater on like the coldest day in the winter. And I went in to talk to him before Carl and the guys showed up. And he showed me the shows he was working on. And he said, I'm working right now on trying to get Jane's to do their first shows in a couple of years and to do Nothing Shocking at the Bowl in Vegas. And I said, oh, that's really cool. And I walked out of the room and I texted Pete immediately. And I said, by the way, if you ever get this show off the ground, I'm totally going to Vegas. And he said, absolutely. And those shows got set up and I got sent out to Vegas by Pete. And I met the band and I met their manager. And after that, I established a good relationship with the management that allowed me, you know, every time they played to keep going back. Now this I got to shoot for the band and the Cap at the same time. But, you know, it's good that, like you said, you end up knowing if you get to work with a band often enough and you got the set list, you kind of know what they're doing and where they're going to be. And, you know, it allows you to get some really great shots sometimes. I mean, I had the same thing happen. They played Times Square once, and probably my most iconic shot is Perry crowd surfing Times Square. And all the other 50 photographers in the pit at the CBGB's Fest were facing the wrong way. And I turned around from the stage back onto the audience and got it. I mean, it's just really good to know what a band's doing. And you generally only get that if, you know, you have a real relationship with them. And, you know, we don't get that most of the time. So it's nice if you have it in the moment. But these guys, I mean, like you said, they're a dynamite band live. There's no two ways about it. The energy is there.
So I got one last question for you, Mr. Millman.
Yes, sir.
You used to go see a lot of live music before you ever picked up a camera and shot bands. You know, you were an Uber fan. You were a groupie, man.
Totally.
You were a male groupie. Have you ever been starstruck working with anyone?
Yeah. You know, I mean, honestly, I think I'm relatively starstruck most of the time. I mean, seriously, like even with the young pop acts that you get to work with today, I mean, I have so much respect for people that get on stage and can sing, rap, dance, whatever they're doing. But, you know, I've worked as the house photographer the last few years for the Love Rocks benefit for God's Love We Deliver, which, you know, you were at this year and Dino's at every year too. And, you know, I spent a couple of days last year, 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row, actually, around Robert Plant. And, you know, I was starstruck. We were downstairs eating lunch one day and he came down and started telling stories. And, you know, I don't find it easy not to be that way with these people. But the truth is that I work these Jane shows, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 shows for them. I don't think any of them actually really know my name that well. But, you know, every time Navarro came and stood next to me, I was in awe. So, you know, I just think that we're in a special position. But, you know, I would say that probably the one I just said and being around Phil at the Cap are really two that really just leave me starstruck.
Right on. All right. Once a groupie, always a groupie. Almost famous. Way to go, Mr. Millman. Now, are you sticking around or do you have to bail also?
I'm going to hold in a little if I can, but I have a little person that's asking me to go outside. So I may
All right. Let me know if you can hang in. We'd love to have you stick around for Tech Talk. We just have a few more people to go and then we get to Tech Talk.
I'm here for now.
We're down to our last three. And I think that I'm up next. Right, Steph?
Right. That's right. And I am happy to introduce Jay Blakesberg. He is not a New York-based photographer. He's a San Francisco-based photographer, but he is considered part of the Cap fam and is welcome to shoot at the Cap anytime. This is his 5th book that he has produced for Peter Shapiro. The first was the Fare Thee Well book. He's also produced 3 books from the Lock-In Festivals. Okay, Jay, you're up.
All right. Thanks, Steph. All right, I'm gonna try and go through my stuff quickly here, just so that we can get our last 2 photographers and get into Tech Talk since it's getting late. So my first shot that I have here is a picture of Joe Russo from J-Rad, and the reason why, and this is in the book, and the reason why I included this in this presentation is because this is the first thing that I shot at the Cap. I just happened to be in New York for whatever reason, I don't even remember, and J-Rad was playing at the Cap, and I called Joe Russo, and he put me on the list, and I came up and shot. And that was my introduction to the Capitol Theater. Here's a few shots of my morning jacket from just this last summer. The jacket did a big run of 4 shows that they hadn't played in a while. And I went to all 4 shows, 2 at Red Rocks and 1 at the Cap and 1 in Forest Hills. And just one of my favorite bands to shoot live. These guys are just absolutely epic on stage. And so if you could just kind of flip through some of these shots real quick, Mr. Healy, you can kind of see how intense they are on stage. I first shot them in the Slims, which is a small nightclub here in San Francisco. I don't even remember, 15, 18 years ago, something like that. And I know I shot it on film, so it had to be about 12 or 15 years ago, I guess that's what it was. And then I have the Flaming Lips in here. Like I said earlier, the Lips are a band that I've been working with since 1989. I got hired to do a publicity photo of them in '89 when they were a trio. Their manager at the time was based here in San Francisco. And I've had a relationship with Wayne ever since, and Steven, since he joined the band, and I've shot them over and over again. As a matter of fact, I did a book on the Flaming Lips a number of years ago, which is a fairly hard book to find. But if anybody's interested, just DM me privately. I've got about 6 or 7 left of those books. They're very, very cool books. And so I also asked Wayne for a quote for the back cover of the book. I think that shot that was on with all the balloons is this shot right here that's on the back cover. And Wayne gave me an incredible quote on the back cover about performing at the Cap. It's like a seance, he says. So pick up the book and you can read the quote there. But they're just so visually exciting with their big giant blow up props on stage and the green laser with the giant hands. The lasers are actually in the hands, reflecting off of a giant mirrored ball. If you're on that shot now. And then also that was a double bill with the Claypool Lennon Delirium. So we have a shot of Les Claypool that I shot from on stage here. Les is another artist that I first photographed in 1989. I did a book on the band Primus also, which you can find on my website if you want to check that out. And I was in town. I was actually on vacation at my house on Fire Island when this show was going on. And I left with my daughter to come to the show. She's a big Flaming Lips fan. She danced on stage with the Flaming Lips for the first time when she was 6 years old at the Yahoo Christmas party in San Francisco back in, I think, it must have been 2002, I guess it was. She was born in 96. But anyway, so I've got a long relationship with Les, and they put out a record last year, the Claypool Lennon Delirium, which I did the photos for. So I was happy to go see them live because this, I think, might have been, actually, this was the 2nd or 3rd time I'd seen this band, but I didn't want to miss an opportunity to see the Flaming Lips and Les Claypool at the Capitol Theater. I threw a bunch of Phil Lesh photos in here because that's what I come into New York a lot for. I come in for the holiday birthday runs in March and the holiday Halloween runs in October. And we set up a gallery of my Grateful Dead photographs and Garcia's. And, Phil and I go back and we're family and he's Cap family. And, just happy to, dedicate a lot of time to Phil and his relationship at the Cap. And of course, I love when they put the Steal Your Faces up on the walls. Here's a great shot, if you're on this one, Healy, of Phil kind of peering over his glasses in my direction with the big Steal Your Faces on the wall. And with a Halloween show, here's Robert Randolph in a costume playing his pedal steel, and Phil with that very funny derby. Phil never does a Halloween costume, but I feel like somebody at the Cap backstage gave him that hat as a little costume, and he wore it. And I thought it was really very appropriate. Another Halloween shot with the Pres Hall Jazz Band out jamming with the band on stage with the Terrapin Family Band. Another big wide shot with all those Steal Your Faces up on the walls. Just so much fun. And of course, there's always the bow shot, with the big happy birthday banner up there. This is Jackie Green and Amy Helm, Birds of Paradise, Ben Mott Tench from Tom Petty's band, and of course, Luther Dickinson, Graham Lesh, and John Molo. Neil Young is another great one. So I've been working with Neil since 1991, I believe it was, with this Bridge School benefits. And Neil is one of those artists, more than any artist that I've ever worked with, that hates being photographed. And but for some reason, Neil has put a lot of trust in me, and I'm one of the few photographers. I know Danny Clinch has had access to Neil over the years. But over the years, Neil has let me photograph him in the pit. And so at first they were saying you can only shoot in the pit all the way over to the side and you can't go past the speaker. And I know Neil's management and his wife, Daryl, and I got an audience in front of Frank and Daryl backstage right before he went on. And I said, I need to bring Kenny Schneider, the guy that was in that photo that Mark Millman took, a buddy guy. And because he had to hear it right from the manager's mouth that I could get better access and could shoot the whole show. And so Daryl said to me, he goes, oh yeah, Jay, of course, he can shoot from wherever he wants, whenever he wants, you know, blah, blah. And as long as you're not in Neil's sight lines, it's all good. That's sort of the rule. Don't let Neil see you. So anywhere you can go where Neil can't see you. So got some really great shots of Promise of the Real, which is Lucas Nelson's band. This is from up in the balcony, which again is a great place to shoot at the Cap because you can really see the whole band. And so, and then we get to Mo at the Capitol Theater. This is the first show back when Rob, the bass player in the band Mo, beat his cancer that he had, you know, somewhere in his face after a long series of treatments. And in true Pete Shapiro fashion, he put the big banner up there, welcome back, Rob. And I knew that was going to be a great shot. And I think I asked them to actually come out and do this before they played. So this is actually not a final bow at the end of the show. This is at the beginning of the show, right when they came back. I've got a long relationship with the band Mo and been working with them for a number of years. So they came out for me and they posed with that welcome back, Rob sign. And you can see the crowds just going crazy. And, you know, a lot of times when you shoot the bow shot at the end of the night, the balcony starts thinning out. People are, you know, at a Phil show, it's an older audience. Some people leave before the show ends, but this is before the show started, so it's a packed house, and you can really see that. And just some other great shots of Mo up on stage with Al and Chuck. Pigeons playing ping pong, another great band, dear friends of mine. I connected with the Pigeons guys at Lock-In the first time they played there, and that's how we became friends. I just was blown away by their set. They're so energetic on stage. You can see from this first shot with Greg jumping in air. Their festival, Dome Fest, was supposed to be going on just a couple of weeks ago, and obviously they had to cancel. So they're going to do Home Fest coming up in a couple of weeks, which will be a virtual festival. And I think I'm going to do a little video intro of a video I directed for these guys last year of one of their songs, King Kong, which has special guests, Here Come the Mummies. And we're going to talk about that. So keep your eyes open for a virtual fest. I'm sure it'll be on live from Out There, the series that their management's been doing. And here's just some great shots of all the Pigeons guys. And these are all in the book. Jeremy on guitar, Gator on drums, and Ben on bass guitar. So that's it for me in terms of my photos. But I just want to take this moment here to talk about Brad Tucker. Brad works for Pete Shapiro. And when Pete finally pulled the trigger to say, let's do this Capitol Theater book, he put it into Brad's hands. Brad sort of does special projects for Pete Shapiro. And so Brad and I immediately started saying, okay, what's the list of shows? And that was the first thing that me and Brad did, is we looked at this list of shows that they sent me that had happened between 2012 and I think at the time when we started, maybe 2018. And we started saying, okay, this show, this show, this show, this show, this show. And we picked like 200 shows. And we're like, okay, there's no way we can have 200 shows in this book. And so then me and Brad went down and we narrowed it down to maybe 100 shows. And then there was some other Cap theater photographers that don't work for the Cap anymore, and they had no interest in giving us photos. So there was a photographer, I'm not going to name names, who we never got any images from. So we sort of had to kill a bunch of stuff from that because even though the Cap has some of that in the archives, we need special high-res files for the book. And so we had to pass on some of those shows, and then we started throwing it back to different photographers. And then different people would show up, like Charlie Gross with the Bob Dylan photo and the Elvis Costello thing. And then Gary Flink came on board. And so we were like, oh, let's get that toot shop. That's really great. I want to include that. And so things sort of kept revealing themselves. And so Brad and I were sort of the photo editor, project managers on this book. So I do want to give a big shout out to Brad Tucker for really sticking it out with me, Jay Blakesberg, Mr. ADD, and keeping us on track and getting this going. And I think eventually we came up with a really, really beautiful book that is really a treasure for the Capitol Theater, for the fans, for the photographers. So I do want to remind you guys to go on, buy merch, right? You know, we spent a lot of money to make this book. It is not inexpensive to make a coffee table book. And Pete wanted to do it. And nobody knew that Rona was going to hit, and that we would essentially be turning off all sources of revenue for the Capitol Theater. And, you know, we were waiting on one last element when this book was being done. The book was done, and we were waiting on Phil Lesch's foreword. Phil wrote the foreword for the book, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then Phil sent it to me, and we went into high gear, and we finished the book, and we got it to a printer, and we had it printed in Spain so that we could ship it from the coast of Spain to right to New York, landed on a boat at the port of Newark, New Jersey, and was trucked up to the Capitol Theater in Portchester. And it arrived in Portchester at Phil's birthday shows about 4 or 5 days before our big book party. I mean, that's cutting it close for a book that you're working on for 18 months to get it to your book release party 3 or 4 days before it was going to happen. And all of us photographers were going to be there. Excuse me. We were going to sign your copies. We were going to have a party in Garcia's, and Stephanie was going to be there to sign copies, and Pete Shapiro. We were going to have Phil Lesh sign a bunch of copies, and we were going to take those copies from Phil Lesh and randomly put them back into boxes. And when people lined up to buy books, if the next one we pulled out was signed by Phil Lesh, you just got it, right? There was no special treatment. We weren't giving to anybody that was special, the photographers. It was completely random. If you bought a book and that was the one that came out of the box, signed by Phil, that you would have gotten it. So all of that, of course, was thrown out the window because of Corona, COVID-19, Rona 20. And so we will have a book release party in person at some point in Garcia's when the world gets back to normal. We will all be there. So if you buy your book online now, you can still bring it to the Capitol Theater when we have our event and get it signed. Even if you're not coming to that show, come on up and we'll let you in to get your book signed. We'll make provisions for that. So support the Capitol Theater. Thank you, Brad Tucker, for taking on this project with me and shepherding it through and making it a beautiful book. So next up, we have Jeff Tishman. Unless, yeah, we don't need to ask me any questions. You can ask me later. Steph, how about you introduce Jeff Tishman and talk about Jeff for a second before he.
Okay, sure. My pleasure. Jeff has been shooting full-time since 2003, and he lives just a few miles from the Cap in Rye, New York. He started shooting live music in 2014, and shortly after that, he got his big break when a photographer could not make a show at the Cap, and he was called to shoot the show. Maybe he can tell us what that show was. And he has been shooting at the Cap ever since. He's a part of the Cap fam and Cap staff photographers. And he also shoots for the music blog Stereo Embers magazine. When he is not shooting at the Cap, he works also as a pet photographer. Take it away, Jeff.
All right. Yeah, I had met Morgan, the then general manager or production manager. I was introduced by my friend Elliot Byron, who's the stage manager at the Cap. And I kind of harassed him and emailed him and kept trying to get my foot in the door, and he wasn't very interested. And then for Steve Hackett, which I think was in early 2014, I got a call maybe 2 hours before the show from Morgan and said, "Can you want to come and shoot the show?" And I said, "Sure." It was Steve Hackett, Genesis. And that was my foot in the door, and I've been shooting there ever since. And since I do live so close to the Cap, I find that I volunteer to shoot a lot of the shows that other people aren't interested in. And, you know, I've known Millman for 30 years. We used to see the same shows. I used to be a taper. I used to go out every night of the week. I used to stay out till 5 in the morning in the 90s. And now I'm just old and tired and it has social anxiety, and I don't like crowds. And so when the Cap reopened, it really reinvigorated my desire to see live music. So yeah, I'm just lucky. I get to I'm literally 5 minutes away, so I can go to a show. I could be home literally 5 minutes after I walk out the door. So
awesome.
Just see as much as I can.
Let's jump into your photos. So first up, we have a couple of photos from Father John Misty. Tell us about shooting this show and any insight into those photos.
Yeah, this is an example where I didn't you know, I get to shoot like I love Father John Misty now, but I didn't really know much about him. And, you know, if it wasn't so close, I might not have gone to see the show. And I had seen him on Saturday Night Live the weekend before, and I just didn't get a feeling that it was my type of music or whatever it was. But for me, when I go to a live show, it's not just the music, it's the, you know, the lighting and the stage presence and the showmanship. And this show really, I mean, I was really flying high after seeing the show for days. It was just mesmerizing to me. So, you know, I really became a fan of Father John Misty that night. He had a string section and the projections were interesting, and there was a lot of good stuff to shoot.
Right on. And then we get into Little Steven and the Disciples of Soul, obviously from, you know, Little Steven from Bruce Springsteen's band and The Sopranos.
Yeah.
What's up with this show? What turned you on and made you want to go and shoot this one? And what do you have to say about it?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey, so I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. We slept outside to get tickets for Born in the USA tour, and I'm just a big Little Steven fan. So it was, you know, that's the other thing about the Cap. I got to shoot that Neil Young show. I got to shoot Mudcrutch. I get to see heroes from growing up. I get to be in the pit. I get to be right up front, and it's really thrilling to be able to be in that position. And Little Steven, it was just a fantastic show all around.
Right on. Sheryl Crow, another legendary performer. What's up with Sheryl?
With Sheryl, my wife doesn't see as many concerts as me, and she loves Sheryl Crow. So throughout the whole time I knew her, every time Sheryl came around, I made sure to get tickets to take my wife. And it was just nice to take her to the Cap with me and to be able to shoot the show. And it was, you know, it's always great to shoot someone of her caliber.
And it looks like these shots are from maybe further back. They're not from in the pit. Is she one of the artists that made you shoot from the soundboard?
I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was a seated show and we had to shoot from the soundboard.
Got it.
Definitely.
Right on. And then we've got a double bill of Charles Bradley and Trombone Shorty, which I think are the same show.
It was the same show.
Charles Bradley is just so incredible to shoot live, as is Trombone Shorty. Had you shot these guys before? Did you know about them?
No, well, I knew I was excited to shoot Trombone Shorty. And since Charles Bradley was opening, this was 2015, I honestly had never even heard of him. And, you know, the second he walked out on stage, I knew like, oh, this guy's going to be great. Like you just had to look at him and know that he's a real professional. And also like Alan Toussaint, for the encore, he came out, he was the opener. And for the encore, he came out in a totally different outfit. And I love these pictures because you could just tell from looking at the pictures that it was a great show. Like you don't even have to hear the music, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, he was like, you know, James Brown reincarnated for sure.
He definitely was. Yeah. And I love soul music and I loved everything about him. And I was able to shoot him again at the Brooklyn Bowl just a couple months before he passed away.
All right. I'm going to do a quick follow-up question for you. You shoot a lot of pet portraiture as well as live shows. What do you like most about each of those formats since they're a little bit different? You know, a lot of cool things you can really do with pets. I think it's cool. I have a dog. I take pictures of my dog all the time. He's going to get the tongue out and his teeth growling and funny things. And,
yeah, absolutely.
I could see that as being really fun. Any insight into the pet portraiture world versus shooting crazy rock stars on stage?
Well, yeah, for me, it's just I get the best of both worlds. Those are my two favorite things, being around animals and going to live concerts. So I feel like I'm really lucky. You know, I do a lot of other stuff too to pay the bills, but I do a lot of pet portraits. I've done pet food packaging and other commercial photography in the pet industry. And I shoot a lot of, shelter photography. I have a lot of shelters I work with to help get pets adopted.
Right on. I just adopted a new pet from the SPCA, a little doggy.
Oh, nice.
His name is Wilson. He's the Duke of Lizards.
Nice.
All right, Jeff Tishman, thank you so much. We're going to move on to Scott Harris. Scott, once upon a time, was a lawyer. and now he's a recovering lawyer, and he's retired from practicing law. And that's Scott with a super psychedelic background. And Scott picked up photography as a hobby on a whim in around 2012. And it's really interesting because we'll see one of the shots that he's going to show here of Robert Plant. You know, he shot that with a 600 millimeter lens. Robert Plant makes people shoot from the back of the room. I've worked with Robert, and he does not like to be photographed from a pit and looking up at him. And, you know, a 600 millimeter lens is like, you know, this big, right? Weighs like 900 pounds. But the other thing that's really unique about Scott is that he's kind of a techno nerd. He's a phone geek, loves testing out new gear. And he is one of those guys that it's not about the camera, it's about what the perfect camera is that you have in your hand at that time, and that could be a phone. And he does a lot of phone photography with special lenses. I have an iPhone. He shoots with a I don't know what it is, Samsung, Google, a non-iPhone. And the thing that's great about that is these new non-iPhones have what's called a raw file, right? It's a really high-end file that he can work with, as opposed to just a JPEG that's with an iPhone. And so he can actually work with photos that he takes out of his phone in professional photo editing software. So Mr. Scott Harris, let's go through some of your photos, and then we'll do a little bit of other stuff with you. But the first shot that we have of yours is Umboll. It's this great lighting shot of Humphreys McGee. Talk to me about why you wanted to shoot Humphreys. Is this the music that you're into? You a jam band guy? And let's just jump right in here.
Yeah, I mean, hey everybody. Yeah, I'm definitely a jam band guy. Humphreys, for me, I went out to their Umboll at Chicago the year before this just to experience it because I always liked the band. And the whole thing with the interactive, the way that they create this experience is so unique because the fans are voting and they're improvising on the fly. And it's something that's very raw and original that they do when they create this experience. And so then when the opportunity came up for the venue to host an Umboll, I was like, oh, I've got to shoot this because, you know, doing it in the Cap where you have the room and you can take advantage of the projections and all of that to create that sort of unique experience for everyone is just, it's really special. So combining those two things, music that I like, and the show was fantastic. And, you know, this photo from Umboll, we talk a lot about how there's so many great lighting directors in this scene. And one of my favorites is Jeff Waffle. And he spent a lot of years with Mo and with Humphreys, and his work is unbelievable. And, you know, in that room, he did amazing things. So
right on. Your next two photos here are Robert Plant. There's the wide shot of the band, and this is a great band. I've worked with them a bunch. Robert is just he is the golden god of rock and roll. And then of course there's this closer up shot, which is shot from the back of the room with that long lens I was talking about, that 600 millimeter lens. Had you ever shot with a long lens like that before?
You know, you were saying like how the best camera is the one that you have with you. Totally true. I also think that the best camera is the one that accomplishes what you're trying to achieve as a photographer, right? Most of my photography tends to be super wide angle shots. I think that's probably what my work is most known for. But for someone like Robert Plant, where he's making you stand in the back of the room, you still want to be able to capture the emotion on his face and that whole experience and like get in there. So you really have to use a lens that allows you to achieve, you know, the type of shot that you're trying to get. I don't shoot a ton of portraits normally, but for someone like this, a portrait shot is really what you're trying to, you know, you're reaching in there, you're trying to get the picture. So, yeah, I mean, 600 millimeters, if that's where you need to be to stay in the back of the room, that's what you do.
Right. And had you ever shot with a lens like that before? It's not easy. I've done it, not a lot. Those are like sports lenses and Super Bowl lenses.
Yeah, you know, my whole thing is I don't carry camera bags. I don't like big lenses. I don't like heavy gear. I think a lot of the reason why I shoot on phones is because it doesn't make me think like I'm working because it's so light and it's something that's somewhat unprofessional, you know, but if I can still achieve the results I want and feel like I'm part of the experience as a fan, that's the gear I want to use. So when I shot this from 600 millimeters, it was actually with a really long point and shoot 600 millimeter. So instead of a lens, you know, huge, I mean, the camera itself is just this big, but it can take a raw image. I can edit in Lightroom and I can still produce a result that gives me something that, you know, someone carrying something that weighs 75 pounds would get. It's, you know, all of our photography, cameras have gotten so good now, lenses have gotten so good now. Hell, you could shoot on a phone now, so it really doesn't matter what you're doing. The editing has become so much more a part of what we do as photographers, because when you're starting with a raw file, I don't think a lot of people know this, they're starting with a file that's really flat, there's no processing, and you're making the image your own. Something like a 600 millimeter point and shoot, you know, you can still do that from all the way back by the bar and still get a shot that feels like you're in the photo pit. Right on.
Our next two shots of yours are Trey Band, and I think you're a big fish head also, or maybe were or still are. Was this a thrill to be in the pit with Trey?
Yeah, you know, for me, fish is really what got me into just randomly picking up concert photography. I was going to a lot of fish shows. I'm really more a 3.0 fish fan than anything else. And I was seeing a lot of the work that Dave Van, you know, we talk about photographers who influence us. I was seeing a lot of his work, and I was using his work as my background on my wallpaper on my computer, right? And, you know, after a couple of years, I was like, shit, I want to make my own wallpapers. And so I bought a little point and shoot camera. I started bringing it to fish shows just so I could have a picture that I took as a wallpaper on my computer. And that's right when Instagram happened, and I kind of, you know, picked up music photography from there because people were like, oh, we like your photos. So getting to shoot Trey, you know, at the Cap after I was working there for a couple of years, was really like combining two things that, you know, I love. It's just like, well, shit, he's playing this venue, and it's like, it's amazing that you can, you know, have a musician that has meant so much to you, both musically and photographically, and you're in the photo pit taking pictures of.
Right on. All right. And then lastly for you, we have Iggy Pop, which is also with Josh from, what was the other band that was there? Is this
Stone Age, right?
Into the Stone Age. Right. So Iggy, just such a great body, great stage presence. And then there's the last shot here is a stage diving shot, which I think you shot with a point and shoot. Talk to me about shooting like this versus like a Trey Band or an Humphreys or something like that.
Yeah, so, you know, I think people said a bunch of times, we're all jam band fans here, right? You probably must be a jam band fan to be a Cap photographer, I would have to think. This is the music that we tend to listen to a lot. This is the music we go see a lot. For me, a lot of the shows I've shot for the Cap over the last couple of years have been music that is completely out of left field and not the stuff that I typically would listen to, I mean, who doesn't love Iggy, but it's not the stuff that's not my regular listening, and it's certainly not the stuff that I photograph normally. So getting an opportunity to shoot someone from that genre of music who has stage presence off the charts, you know, he can get as old as, you know, it doesn't matter. Iggy is Iggy, and he owns the audience, and he owns that whole thing in a very different way than a jam band does. Jam bands are about improvising and creating music. But the stage presence, while it's still good, it's not Iggy Pop running around without a shirt on, diving into the crowd, typically flipping everyone off and being like, fuck yeah, Portchester, you know? But that's
unless you're Andy Frasco, then you're doing all that.
Absolutely. Andy's amazing. And there's a lot of parallels there. So getting an opportunity to shoot something that was completely out of my wheelhouse was fantastic.
Nice. Right on. All right, it's getting late here. We've been going for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Any questions, Harrison, our good pal? Any questions for anybody that you got?
Yeah, we got some questions for the group in general. The first one is from Jack, and Jack is curious, what are some of the best vantage points for shooting at the Cap? And do you ever get advanced knowledge of things that will be projected onto the walls of the venue?
Yes and yes. Andrew Blackstein, what's the best vantage points at the Cap?
I always like the top. You can see from Scott's background kind of what I'm talking about. I love that vantage point. I love getting that wall on the right, kind of real big and real close and shooting down. And yes, to the other question about the projections, especially working with the Biscuits, I kind of got privy to some of the unique stuff that they were running.
Same thing with Phil and Friends. Actually, I would usually go to the projector guy Scott, I believe his name is, or at least at a lot of the Phil shows. And I would say, hey man, how about on this song and this song, we do Steal Your Faces on the Wall. And he would set that up for me. And we would pick songs where it made sense so that I could be either on the stage looking behind Phil, looking out and seeing them, or up in the balcony or whatever it is. But yeah, I definitely manipulated that situation a few times. Next question, Mr. Harrison.
So this question is from Clara, and Clara wants to know how, if at all, the intricate light rigs that the bands are bringing to these venues affect photographers and their shots of the bands.
Millman, what do you got?
I would say, I mean, listen, concert photography is tricky. The lighting can be really, really bad sometimes. It looks great to the audience, but it's really, really bad for us. And a lot of smoke can be awful. It's part of the game. You just have to learn how to adjust quickly on the fly. And, you know, sometimes you just hope you get it. Occasionally you don't. But, you know, it's fun to do, but people shouldn't think that just because they see a beautiful lit up stage that it works that way, particularly with a digital sensor. So.
Chad, I think you have something to add to that.
Yeah, the last show, actually, I got this shoot at the Cap before all this happened, was actually Lauryn Hill. And she actually had a scrim down in front of her where she was actually projecting lasers through it. So what you're seeing from the audience crowd is this really cool, picturesque, but being a photographer trying to shoot through that, you know, you have to worry about your sensors for your camera. That could be like, you know, you could blow your whole camera by these lasers and all that. So it could really just go back and forth of just like, you have to learn how to move around and make sure, you know, each little light can actually end up being your death too.
Yeah, I'll add in one last thing on the lighting is that a lot of jam band lighting guys light the big picture, but don't light the band members, right? So if you're in the back of the room, or let's say you're 20 or 30 or 40 feet back and further, you're getting this big picture and it looks incredible. But if you're 30 feet and forward, you know, all you're seeing is a lot of moving lights and you're not seeing these intricate patterns that they're creating and the symmetry and stuff like that. And the bands themselves, the band members themselves are actually not lit. And so like if you get a band like where an artist might jump out on the speaker and be playing guitar, they're not lighting that guy up and he's pitch black. Whereas all this other stuff's going on and it looks great as a whole stage, but an individual band member, you might not even see them. Next question, Mr. Harrison.
So the next question is from Susan, and Susan wants to know, I guess this is a general question for any of you, what have been your favorite moments shooting at the Capitol Theater?
Jeff Tishman?
Like I mentioned, shooting Neil Young was incredible for me. I only got to shoot the first two songs from one side of the stage, so I got a couple good shots. And seeing people like Glenn Hansard and people I really love who I might not have had an opportunity to shoot otherwise.
Scott Harris, your favorite?
I think the first time that J-Rad played there, it was like in late December, and they just completely destroyed it. Like it was just an unbelievable, mind-blowing. I remember seeing their first show at Brooklyn Bowl that they ever played, and that blew my mind. And then they played that show in December, I think 2013. It was amazing. You know,
Gary Flink?
Toots, just because it was my very first show there. Gary Clark Jr. Put on an amazing show there a few years ago. John Butler, who's so fun to see live, he did a tremendous show there. But I'd have to say Toots, just because it was my first show there.
Right on. Andrew?
It's too bad Dino's not in for this because I did want to mention it. The last J-Rad run, Jimmy Fallon was hanging out with Pete that night, and Jimmy wanted to get on stage with J-Rad for the encore. They did Neil Young's Fucking Up and a bunch of other tunes, but me and Dino were in the pit. I was shooting for J-Rad, Dino was shooting for the Cap, and Jimmy puts his hand out to me, and I'm just sitting there clicking away, having no idea what's going on. And Dino's next to me. And, you know, Jimmy moved on from me very quickly, put his hand out to Dino, brought him up on stage, and they did the Bruce Springsteen Dancing in the Dark medley. So that was really fun watching Dino dance on stage.
Nice. Chad, did I already get you or now on this one?
I would say when the Black Crowes did their whole like acoustic tour run, that was something because I'm a big fan of Chris Robinson.
Right.
Brother.
Scott Harris?
I think I did this already, right?
Okay, sorry. Millman, you haven't gone yet, have you?
I don't think so. I mean, there were a couple of times. I mean, I really dug shooting Bonnie Raitt early on. I got the second two songs from the side. They only approved one image at the end, but you know, that was another legend that I always loved, and I was excited to be able to get an opportunity to shoot her. And I was grateful to walk away with that.
Right. And for myself, I'm going to say probably Neil Young also, and or My Morning Jacket, and of course any of the Phil shows. All right, one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up because this has been going on for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Oh wait, I want to ask Stephanie. Stephanie, what's your favorite show that you attended at the Cap, even though you don't shoot?
Oh, my favorite show. Black Crows, also and did As the Crow Flies, The Further Run, when Marcus King came from Garcia's and then came to the main stage. That was really exciting. The Mo Show, when after Rob returned from his illness. Too many.
Right on. All right, Harrison, you got one more question for us?
Absolutely. So can you please tell us about a memorable shot that you captured by pure accident or chance? And that question is from Glenn G.
Anybody want to take that one? We'll go for one answer. Who's got it? Chad, what do you got?
So as Steph was just saying, as the crow flies, I have a photo of Chris Robinson without a shoe on, but his foot came up basically in front of my camera, completely right place, right time. And it's just the bottom of his foot. His arms are out like Jesus. And he's just, yeah, I'm a god. And it's just like, that's it. That's the photo. All right, I'm good. I can get out of the pit now.
Right. We all love that. We all love when we captured that. And anybody else have anything, final comments, questions, concerns that they want to throw in here? All right. You guys, thank you all, Cap family, for being part of this. Stephanie, thanks for co-hosting with me. Again, thanks to all the Cap Theater staff and the tech team, Healy behind these photos and stories. As I mentioned before, saveourstages.com, buy merch from your local venues, buy merch from the Cap. Go to the, put in your browser, Capitol Theater merchandise, and you'll see where you can buy the book. Please buy it. Please support us. Photos and stories. I'm your host, Jay Blakesberg. I'll be back in 2 weeks on June 7th, talking about the legendary photographer, Jim Marshall. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed what you heard about the Capitol Theater Coffee Table Book, Volume 1. There will be a Volume 2 if live music comes back soon enough. All right. Love you guys. See you out there. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, everybody. Have a good Sunday. Enjoy Memorial Day, and stay healthy. Stay sane. Cheers.
Cheers.